Section 1. The town that time forgot. Close your eyes for a moment, or keep them open. Either way is fine. You are comfortable right now. You are settled, relaxed, and the world outside whatever room you are in has gotten very quiet, or is about to. And into that quiet, I want to introduce you to a town. A very specific town, a town with a nuclear power plant on its outskirts, a tire fire that has been burning since the mid 1980s, a monorail that runs once and barely, and a family living on a street called Evergreen Terrace who have been there, unchanged, undisturbed, and unaged since December 17th, 1989. The town is called Springfield. You already know this. Everyone already knows this. Springfield is arguably the most famous fictional address in the entire history of American television, and that is not an exaggeration made for dramatic effect. More people can locate Springfield on an emotional map than can locate the actual capital of half the states in the real country that Springfield is supposed to exist inside. Springfield is everywhere. Springfield is woven into the cultural fabric of the last 4 decades. And Springfield has one quality that, once you sit with it long enough, once you let it settle into your thoughts the way a slow tide settles over sand, becomes one of the most quietly haunting things about any piece of storytelling you have ever encountered. Springfield does not change, not in any real, fundamental way, not in the ways that matter. The family at the center of it, the Simpsons, Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and little Maggie, they were exactly what they are tonight when George H.W. Bush was president, and the Berlin Wall had just come down and the internet was something that existed in university basements and nowhere else. Bart was 10 years old then. He is 10 years old now. Lisa was 8. She is 8. Maggie was 1, sitting in the front seat of the family car on the way home from the grocery store, her pacifier moving in that slow, rhythmic pulse that she has maintained for longer than most of the show's current audience has been alive. 36 years, 788 episodes, 36 seasons of Sunday nights, of couch gags and opening title sequences, and Bart writing lines on the chalkboard and Homer backing the car out of the driveway while a cat gets crushed beneath the wheel. And through all of it, through 3 decades and a half of American history, through every presidential administration and technological revolution and cultural earthquake that has reshaped the country around them, the Simpsons have remained perfectly, impossibly, almost cosmically still. Tonight, we are going to explore that stillness. We are going to walk through it room by room, the way you walk through a house late at night, when everyone else is asleep and every sound is quieter than usual and the darkness feels softer than it does in the daytime. We are going to look at the paradoxes, the contradictions, the buried mysteries, and the unasked questions that have been accumulating inside Springfield for 36 years without ever being resolved. And we are going to do it slowly. We are going to take our time. Because these are not the kinds of stories that benefit from rushing. These are the kinds of stories that only reveal themselves when you are still enough to let them come to you. So get comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Let your body sink into whatever surface is holding you right now. And let me tell you about a town where time stopped, and nobody noticed, and nobody was supposed to. The first thing you need to understand about Springfield is that the show was never supposed to run this long. No television show is, really. When Matt Groening sold the concept to Fox in the late 1980s, the idea was a half-hour animated sitcom about a working-class American family. Dysfunctional, but loving. Satirical, but grounded. The kind of show that would comment on American suburban life the way the best sitcoms always have, by holding a slightly funhouse mirror up to the ordinary and letting audiences laugh at the distortion. It was not designed to be a machine that would still be running in the 2020s. It was not designed to accumulate 800 episodes of continuity and contradiction. It was not designed to create paradoxes so dense and layered that people would spend decades trying to untangle them. And yet, here we are. The show premiered on a Sunday night in December 1989. The episode was called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, a Christmas special that introduced the family with warmth and unexpected tenderness. Homer discovered he was not going to receive his Christmas bonus from work. He became a department store Santa to make up the difference. He took Bart to the dog track on Christmas Eve as a last-ditch attempt to win enough money for presents, and they lost. And they came home with the losing greyhound instead, a dog named Santa's Little Helper. And the family stood around this accidental pet in their living room, and the show asked you to find that beautiful, and you did, and it was. And something began that night that has not stopped since. The Simpsons aged out of its cultural moment and kept going. It outlasted the 1990s, which was supposed to be its decade. It survived the 2000s, which everyone assumed would kill it. It crossed into the 2010s and then the 2020s with the same family in the same house on the same street, still watching the same television, still eating at the same kitchen table, still driving past the same power plant on the way to school every morning. And here is where the paradox begins. Not with any specific episode or storyline or character decision. Here is where it begins. With time. The show uses what the industry calls a floating timeline. This means that the characters exist in an eternal present tense. Whatever year the episode airs, that is the year the characters are living in. When a 2024 episode references smartphones and streaming services and social media, it does so without any acknowledgement that these things did not exist when the show began. The characters just live in the present, always in the present, perpetually contemporary, while remaining perpetually, impossibly the same age they were when it all started. This is a practical storytelling decision. It has been used by countless animated shows and comic strips for generations. Peanuts did it, Garfield did it, the Flintstones did it. In animation, characters do not age unless the story specifically requires it. And long-running shows almost never require it because aging means change, and change means endings, and endings mean the show stops making money. So the characters stay frozen. Fine. Except The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has started to crack under its own weight. It has created contradictions that go beyond mere continuity errors into something stranger. Something that starts to feel less like a production convenience and more like a feature of Springfield itself. A quality of the town, not the show. Here's one example. When the series began, Homer and Marge's backstory placed them in high school in the late 1970s. Their romance was set against the cultural backdrop of disco and Watergate and the tail end of the Vietnam era. Homer had a specific hairstyle from that period. Marge wore a specific dress to prom. Their early years were textured with the specific cultural residue of a particular American moment. But if Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they could not have graduated high school in 1978. The math does not work, so the show has quietly, persistently rewritten their backstory over the years. In later flashback episodes, their youth has been relocated. They are shown as teenagers in the 1990s, then the early 2000s. In one version of their origin story, they are grunge-era teenagers listening to Nirvana. In another, they are early internet kids. The specifics shift and reset and shift again, tracking the forward movement of the floating timeline while the characters remain frozen in their domestic amber. What this means is that Homer and Marge Simpson do not have a stable past. Their history is not fixed. Their memories are a revision in progress, endlessly updated to maintain the illusion that they belong to the present moment, even as they stay permanently still inside it. That is not a small thing. That is not a trivial continuity wrinkle. That is a family whose very origin story is unstable. A family whose past keeps changing while their present never does. And if their past is a revision, if the story of how they met and fell in love and built a life can be rewritten at will by the unseen forces that govern Springfield, what does that say about the reliability of everything else we know about them? What does it say about every flashback, every formative memory, every foundational moment that is supposed to explain who these people are and why they became what they became? The ground beneath the Simpsons family is not solid. It has never been solid. And the longer you stare at it, the more clearly you can see the hairline cracks running through it. There is a specific quality to Springfield at night that the show occasionally captures, and that, if you pay attention, is genuinely different from how the town feels during the day. In the daytime, Springfield is loud. It is busy and chaotic and populated with events that cascade into each other with the relentless energy of cartoon logic. Homer causes an accident that leads to a town meeting, that leads to a mob, that leads to something being burned down, that leads back to the Simpson house on Evergreen Terrace, where Marge is standing in the kitchen with a casserole dish and a worried expression. And Homer falls through the door, and the music swells, and the family gathers, and something is briefly, imperfectly resolved. But at night, at the edge of the frame, in the background of scenes that are nominally about something else, Springfield at night is quiet in a way that does not quite feel like quiet. There is the power plant on the edge of town, its cooling towers releasing their slow, perpetual breath of steam into the dark air. There is the tire fire, which has been burning so long that Springfield residents have stopped registering it as a fire and started treating it as a landmark. There is the cemetery on the hill where the graves go back further than the town's official founding, which raises questions that nobody asks. There is Evergreen Terrace itself, with its identical houses and its two green lawns, and its streetlights that cast exactly the same yellow as the skin of every person who lives beneath them. And in the house at the end, in the particular house we have been visiting for 36 years, there is a family asleep. Homer is on the couch, or in the bed, or occasionally in a pile on the kitchen floor. Marge is in the bedroom with her towering blue hair spread across the pillow, in a way that should be physically impossible but is simply how things are in Springfield. Bart is in his room with his skateboard leaning against the wall and his slingshot on the nightstand. Lisa is in her room with her saxophone case open and a book propped on her pillow and the light still on because Lisa is always still reading. And Maggie is in her crib, pacifier in place, enormous eyes closed, not moving at all. They are the same people they were last week. They will be the same people next week. And the town around them is the same town it has always been, with the same cracked cooling towers breathing steam into the same dark sky, and the same fire burning on the same hill, and the same yellow glow on every window on every street from here to the edge of whatever state this happens to be in tonight. That is where we begin, right there, in that quiet, in that stillness that the show returns to, episode after episode, year after year, like a tide that goes out and always, always comes back. Let us talk about the geography for a moment, because even the shape of Springfield is a paradox. The town has oceanfront property. It also has mountains. It also has a desert that Homer has been stranded in at least twice. It has forests thick enough to get lost in and farmland flat enough to see from one end to the other. It has a river, a gorge, a harbor, and at various points it has been established to border Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, which is a geographic impossibility so complete that it essentially describes half the continental United States simultaneously. Nobody from Springfield ever seems to find this strange. When a character needs to drive to the coast, there is a coast. When a character needs to get to the mountains in an afternoon, the mountains are available. The town expands and contracts around the needs of the story without any concern for the physical laws that govern actual American geography. The show's creator, Matt Groening, admitted in a 2012 interview that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, the town he grew up near, and that he chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America. There is a Springfield in nearly every state. The name is so generic, so universally applicable that it functions as a kind of geographic blank space, a placeholder for any American town anywhere. This was intentional. The show was designed to feel like home to everyone watching it, regardless of where they actually lived. Springfield was supposed to be every American town, simultaneously, all at once. But here's what happens when you run a show for 36 years while maintaining that geographic universality. The contradictions accumulate, the impossibilities stack, and eventually you are left with a town that does not just resemble every American city. You are left with a town that contains every American geography within its borders, compressed into a single impossible space where you can have a beach in the morning, and go skiing in the afternoon, and drive through the desert before dinner. That is not a city. That is something else. And the longer you look at it, the less it resembles a place that exists according to the rules of the physical world, and the more it resembles a place that exists according to different rules entirely. Rules that have more to do with need and memory and the logic of dreams than with latitude and longitude and the measurable distance between one place and another. Springfield is not on any map because Springfield exists inside something other than geography. We will spend the rest of tonight figuring out what that something is. Before we move forward, I want to pause here and invite you to take a long, slow breath. In through the nose, hold it for just a moment, and then let it go. You are doing beautifully. You are already more relaxed than you were when we started. Your body is heavier than it was a few minutes ago, settling into the surface beneath you, letting gravity do its quiet work. And Springfield is just outside the edges of your vision now, that impossible town with its nuclear plant and its yellow people and its tire fire and its family on the couch, all of them suspended in amber, all of them waiting for something that never quite comes. We are going to keep going, but we are going to keep going slowly, the way Springfield moves when it is not in the middle of a plot, the way it feels in those background shots of Evergreen Terrace at dusk, when there is no joke being set up and no catastrophe underway, and the town is just sitting there being itself, strange and familiar and very, very still. The paradox of Springfield's frozen time is not just a quirk of animation. It is, when you look at it honestly, one of the most philosophically interesting things about any long-running piece of popular fiction. Because time, in the real world, does one thing above all others. It changes you. It changes everything around you. The person you are tonight is not the same person you were 10 years ago, not in any deep way. The experiences you have accumulated, the losses you have absorbed, the ways your body has shifted, the things that used to matter that no longer do, and the things that have grown to matter that you never expected. All of that is the work of time. Time is the mechanism by which people become themselves. The Simpsons do not have that. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. He has not accumulated anything. He has not become anyone. Every lesson he learns in an episode is reset by the next one. Every character development, every moment of growth or vulnerability or genuine change is erased before the following Sunday. Bart is always exactly where he started. Perpetually 10, perpetually rebellious, perpetually skating toward trouble with his slingshot in his back pocket and his homework incomplete. Lisa is always 8 and brilliant and lonely and hopeful in the specific, painful way that very intelligent children are hopeful, believing that the world can be made better if you are persistent enough, smart enough, loud enough. She has been playing that saxophone for 36 years without improving or giving it up. She has been writing in her journal for 36 years without the entries ever accumulating into the story of a life actually lived. And Homer. Homer has been failing at everything for 36 years without the failures ever compounding into ruin. He has been loving his family for 36 years without that love ever being tested to its actual breaking point. He has been Homer Simpson, precisely and only Homer Simpson, in every episode that has ever aired, and the permanence of that identity, the absolute refusal of it to shift or soften or scar in any lasting way, is either the most comforting thing about the show or the most unsettling. Depending on how you look at it, tonight, lying here in the dark, with the world quiet around you and your thoughts beginning to slow toward the long drift of almost sleep, I think the comforting reading and the unsettling reading might be the same reading. Because the thing that makes it comforting, the promise that Homer will always find his way home, that the family will always be there on the couch when the credits roll, that Evergreen Terrace will always look the same and Springfield will always be waiting and the loop will always reset and everything will always be okay by the end of the episode, that promise is only possible because time stopped. And time stopped because something made it stop. And whatever made it stop has been sitting at the center of Springfield for 36 years, quiet and enormous and mostly invisible, like the tire fire on the hill that nobody notices anymore because they have lived downwind of it for so long, that the smoke has become just another part of what the air smells like. We are going to find it, not all at once. Gradually, the way sleep comes, layer by layer, softly, in the dark. If you are still awake at this point, and it is perfectly fine if you are beginning to drift, drop a comment below with the time and the place you are watching this from. Your city, your time zone, wherever you are in the world right now, reading or listening in the quiet. There is something lovely about knowing that people are falling asleep to Springfield from 100 different places at once, that this strange, impossible town is keeping company with insomniacs and night shift workers and people who just need something soft to fall asleep to all across the world. And if this is something you want more of, if this kind of slow, deep dive into the things that make the shows and the stories we love more interesting than they first appear, subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from. The show is vast. The paradoxes run deep. And we are just getting started. Section 2. The Nuclear Heart of Springfield. There is something specific about the way the Springfield nuclear power plant appears in the opening credits of the show that is worth noticing. Every episode of The Simpsons for 36 years has opened with the same sequence. The camera moves through Springfield, drifting over the rooftops and the streets, past the school and the church and the town square, and at a certain point in that drift, the power plant appears. Its cooling towers, enormous and gray and perpetually steaming, rise above the surrounding buildings the way a cathedral might rise above a medieval town, dominating the skyline, announcing itself as the thing that the whole community is organized around. And then the camera moves on. The plant is in frame for a few seconds, acknowledged and dismissed, and the credits continue toward the family and the couch and the television. But the plant is always there, every single episode. In the opening, in the background of exterior shots, in the establishing sequences that place you inside Springfield before the story begins. The cooling towers are always visible somewhere on the horizon, their steam rising into whatever sky the episode has decided on. Their presence so constant and so taken for granted that it has become essentially invisible. Which is, it turns out, exactly the point. Let me tell you what we know about the Springfield nuclear power plant as a matter of established canonical fact. Information the show has given us directly across dozens of episodes without ever quite connecting the dots in the way they need to be connected. The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is owned by Charles Montgomery Burns, the richest man in Springfield, and, depending on which episode you consult, quite possibly the richest man in America. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town, meaning that every light in every house on Evergreen Terrace is running on electricity generated inside those cracked cooling towers. A safety inspection conducted within the show's timeline found 342 violations. 342. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to code, to address those violations in a way that would meet the legal minimum standard of safety for a nuclear facility operating in the United States, was $56 million. Burns declined to spend it, not because $56 million would have bankrupted him. Burns is a billionaire many times over, and the show has depicted his fortune as essentially bottomless, sufficient to fund private armies and block out the sun and maintain medical treatments so advanced they are not available to anyone else on Earth. $56 million for Charles Montgomery Burns is a rounding error on a rounding error. He declined to spend it because fixing the violations would have meant acknowledging that the violations existed, and acknowledging that they existed would have opened a door that Burns has spent decades, possibly centuries, keeping firmly shut. The door behind which sits the question that Springfield has never been able to ask and answer simultaneously. What has the plant already done to the people living downwind of it? The violations themselves are worth sitting with because they are not the minor paperwork infractions that the word violation might conjure. These are not missed deadlines or improperly filed reports. These are things like radioactive waste being discharged directly into bodies of water, radioactive material being stored on children's playgrounds, plutonium being used as a paperweight on an office desk, cooling towers that have been compromised by structural failures and repaired, if you can call it that, with chewing gum pressed into the cracks. And then there is the detail that the show drops minus and never returns to, the one that sits at the back of the mind long after the episode ends and the channel changes and the house gets quiet. Human skeletons in the basement. Not the skeleton of a single person who might have died in some industrial accident at some point in the plant's history. Skeletons, plural, in the basement of an operational nuclear facility. The show shows them to you and moves on. The safety inspector notes them and continues. Nobody investigates. Nobody asks who these people were or how they ended up dead inside a nuclear reactor. Springfield just absorbs this information and forgets it, the way Springfield absorbs and forgets everything. But the bones are still there. They will always have been there. The safety inspector whose job it is to prevent all of this from continuing to happen. The man who stands as the human barrier between the Springfield nuclear power plant and the catastrophic failure that those 342 violations make increasingly likely with every passing year is Homer Simpson. This is worth saying plainly and sitting with for a moment. Homer Simpson, whose IQ has been canonically stated to be 55. Homer Simpson, whose cognitive function was physically reduced in childhood by a foreign object lodged in his brain, a crayon that reached his neural tissue and stayed there for decades without a single medical professional noticing or choosing to remove it. Homer Simpson, who has fallen asleep at his workstation during active meltdown warnings. Homer Simpson, who once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if the radiation would make it grow larger. That is the man standing between Springfield and nuclear catastrophe. That is the safety inspector. And here is the thing, this is not an accident. The show eventually makes this explicit, and we will get to that, but the argument has always been available in the text if you look at it. When the plant was briefly sold to German investors, one of the first things they did was fire Homer. His incompetence was immediately obvious to anyone approaching the facility without a vested interest in maintaining it. The German investors then assessed the cost of bringing the plant up to code and nearly went bankrupt from the estimate alone. Burns bought the facility back and immediately rehired Homer. Not because Homer was the best available candidate for the position, because Homer was the best available candidate for the position as Burns actually conceived of it, which was not safety inspector in any meaningful sense, but something closer to institutional camouflage, a human embodiment of the plant's willingness to ignore everything that was wrong with it. A competent safety inspector would shut the facility down within a week. Homer ensures it keeps running. Now, let us talk about Blinky. In the second season of the show, a fisherman pulls a three-eyed fish from a river near the power plant. The fish, quickly named Blinky, becomes a local and then national news story. A candidate for governor of the state uses Blinky as evidence that Burns's facility is contaminating the local water supply. The argument is simple. The fish have mutated. Something in the water near the plant has altered their biology in a fundamental and visible way. The three eyes are not natural. The three eyes are a symptom. Burns is forced to address this publicly. He appears on television and eats a piece of Blinky on camera to prove it is safe for human consumption. The town watches. The candidate's poll numbers suffer. The story dies down. And nobody asks the obvious question. If the fish have three eyes, what is happening to the people drinking the same water? The answer to that question has been visible on screen in every episode of the show for 36 years. It has been sitting right there in plain sight, drawn into the character designs with the precise strokes of artists who were either making a very sophisticated creative decision or following an instruction from showrunners who understood what they were building. Everyone in Springfield is yellow, not tan, not olive, not the kind of warm complexion that might plausibly result from a lifetime in whatever climate Springfield occupies on any given day. Yellow. A specific, unusual, medically interesting shade of yellow that does not occur naturally in any human population anywhere in the world. And four fingers. Every Springfield resident has four fingers on each hand. Not five. Four. The loss of a digit is, in developmental biology, the kind of thing that tends to result from genetic mutation or significant environmental exposure to teratogens, substances that interfere with normal fetal development. The four fingers are usually explained as an animation convention, a shortcut that makes character hands easier to draw and move. This is true. This is the production rationale. But within the logic of the show's own universe, the logic that allows Blinky's three eyes to be treated as a meaningful environmental signal, the four fingers are the same kind of signal. They are a marker, and they mark every single person who lives in Springfield, and only those people. When guest characters appear in the show, when celebrities and famous faces make their cameo appearances in Springfield, they are drawn differently. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are less dramatically bulging. Their features more closely approximate normal human anatomy. The show's art style distinguishes between people who live in Springfield and people who are visiting, and the distinction it draws is between people who look like they have been somewhere specific long enough for it to change them, and people who have not. The people inside the contamination zone look one way. The people outside it look another. Then there is Burns himself, and what the show tells us about his body in an episode from the 8th season. In a story about Homer encountering what he believes is an alien in the woods near Springfield, The eventual reveal is that the glowing figure Homer saw was not an alien at all. It was Burns, returning home from a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so loaded with chemical and radiation components, that after each session, Burns's body emits a visible green glow. He wanders out of the treatment facility in a dazed, temporary state of euphoria, glowing faintly in the dark, stumbling through the woods like a creature from another world. He literally glows. His body is so saturated with whatever is being administered to it on that weekly schedule that it produces visible light. And the people of Springfield see this glowing figure in the forest, and their first assumption is extraterrestrial life. Not radiation, not nuclear contamination, an alien from outer space. That is the depth of the collective unwillingness to look at what is actually happening. The man who owns the power plant glows in the dark because of what his facility has done to his own body and the bodies of everyone around him. And the town looks at the glow and thinks of science fiction instead of science. The show's own canon brought the matter to its logical extreme in the Simpsons movie, released in 2007 and set in the same Springfield, that had been accumulating its contamination across 17 seasons by that point. In the film, the environmental damage from decades of unchecked pollution reaches such a critical threshold that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determines that the only solution is to seal the entire town under a massive glass dome to contain the contamination and prevent it from spreading. Let me be precise about what that means. The United States government looked at Springfield and concluded that the entire town was so toxic, so fundamentally and comprehensively contaminated, that the only viable option was to physically quarantine it, to remove it from contact with the rest of the country, to place a glass wall around it and seal the door. Springfield is not just polluted. Springfield is classified at the highest federal level as a contamination zone requiring isolation from the rest of the country. And the people inside it are still inside it when the dome goes down. Every Springfield resident who has been drinking that water and breathing that air and living in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers for the entirety of their lives. They are still there, still inside, still yellow. Here is the detail that brings the whole theory into its sharpest focus. Burns is not just profiting from the radiation that his plant produces. Burns is, in a very literal physiological sense, powered by it. His weekly treatments involve controlled radiation exposure. His body has been so fundamentally altered by a century or more of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal biological processes. He requires external radiation input the way a normal person requires food and water. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is maintenance. The management of a body that has long since ceased to function according to the biological rules everyone else is subject to. Burns understands radiation better than anyone in Springfield because his own survival depends on managing its effects. He has a personal pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing experimental treatments. He has private physicians who have been maintaining his impossible body for longer than most institutions have existed. He knows exactly what radiation does to biological systems, because radiation is the thing keeping him in one. And he knows what his plant is doing to Springfield, because Springfield is his proof of concept, because Springfield is his laboratory. Because the three-eyed fish in the river, and the yellow families in the houses, and the cognitive impairment that keeps them too slow and too settled to ask the right questions about any of this, all of it traces back to the same source, and the source knows it, and the source has always known it, and the source has spent 36 years making sure that the knowledge stays safely contained behind the same cracked cooling towers that contain everything else. Let your breathing slow a little more. The power plant is still there on the edge of town, its steam rising in the dark, its lights reflected in the river below. The river where Blinky swam once and where things live now that have not been named yet, that science has not gotten around to classifying because science has not been invited to look. And in the houses downstream, the yellow families sleep, their four-fingered hands folded on their chests, their bulging eyes closed, their strange, beautiful hair spread across their pillows in shapes that defy the laws of physics and have always, always defied them. They are not dreaming of the plant. They are not dreaming of the river. They are dreaming of ordinary things, of Sunday mornings and donuts and kids on bikes and the particular quality of light through kitchen windows on days when nothing is happening and everything is fine. And in the dark, the plant breathes, and the steam rises, and the river carries whatever it carries downstream, and everything in Springfield stays exactly as it has always been. Section 3. Homer's Endless Sleep. There is an episode of The Simpsons that aired in the spring of 1993, and that, if a particular theory is correct, is not just an episode but a dividing line. A before and after. The moment at which everything the show had been and everything the show would become separated into two different territories that never quite overlap. The episode is called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. It is the 18th episode of the 4th season. It aired on April 1st, 1993. And the events at the center of it, which the show presents as a comedic misfortune within a larger story about April Fool's pranks, are, depending on how you read them, either a throwaway clip show premise or the fulcrum around which the entire 36-year history of the program pivots. Here is what happens. Bart, in the spirit of April Fool's Day, plays an escalating series of pranks on Homer. The pranks get larger and more elaborate until Bart takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and has it placed inside an industrial paint shaker. He shakes the can until it is under extreme pressure and then puts it back in the refrigerator for Homer to find. When Homer opens it, the explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. This is treated as funny. This is the April Fool's prank taken to its logical, cartoonish extreme. But here is where the episode stops being just a clip show setup. While Homer is lying in his hospital bed in the aftermath of the explosion, he sees a vending machine across the room. He tries to get a candy bar. The machine tips over, falls on top of him, and puts him into a coma. A real coma, not a cutaway joke, not a fantasy sequence, not one of the show's frequent dream segments. The show is explicit about this. Homer flatlines. He enters a clinically unconscious state that the narrative treats as medically serious. He is in a coma, and he stays there for 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer waking up. Bart is tearfully at his bedside, confessing that the prank was his fault. And Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling his son, and the family laughs, and Homer laughs, and the show moves on. Except, in the final moments of that same episode, the doctor informs Homer that he lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%? Gone permanently, never to be recovered. And Homer's response to learning that he is permanently brain damaged is to laugh. He says he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. The episode ends on this note. The show continues for 32 more years, as if none of it happened, unless it did not happen, unless Homer never woke up. This is the Homer coma theory, and it is the single most internally consistent, most emotionally resonant, most structurally supported fan theory in the history of The Simpsons. The basic argument is simple, almost impossibly so. Homer did not wake up from that coma in April 1993. Every episode that has aired since that date is a dream. Not a metaphorical dream, a literal dream being generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, his body maintained by machines, his family sitting beside him in a waiting room or a bedside chair, watching and waiting and hoping. While inside that hospital bed, inside the dark and the quiet and the chemical haze of whatever the doctors are administering to keep Homer's body functioning, Homer's brain is running a simulation. A long, elaborate, increasingly surreal simulation of a life continuing to be lived. The simulation has no obligation to follow the rules of the waking world because it is not the waking world. It is the dream of a man who went unconscious in the spring of 1993 and has not come back. And the evidence. The evidence is genuinely difficult to dismiss. Consider first the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show. It was satirical and comedic, but it was, at its core, grounded in recognizable human experience. The storylines dealt with the kinds of problems that actual families have. Financial stress, marital tension, children struggling in school, a father trying to be better than he is and falling short in ways that hurt the people he loves. The emotional core of the early seasons was built on the friction between ordinary aspiration and ordinary failure, and what made it work was the specificity of that friction. It felt true because it was rooted in something true. After the coma episode, the show changes. Homer goes to space. Not as a fantasy sequence, not as a what-if episode. As a canonical event in which Homer Simpson, the safety inspector at a nuclear power plant with an IQ of 55, is sent to space aboard a NASA shuttle after a scheduling mistake. Homer discovers that his mother is alive and has been a fugitive radical since the 1960s. Homer joins a secret society. Homer meets God. Twice. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante mob. Homer befriends celebrities, presidents, the heads of foreign governments. The escalation is so dramatic, so complete, so total in its departure from the grounded domestic world of the early seasons that it has been the subject of debate for nearly 30 years. When did The Simpsons stop being The Simpsons? When did it jump the shark? When did the writing get lazy? The coma theory answers these questions with a specificity that no other explanation can match. The Simpsons did not jump the shark. Homer's brain got worse. The increasingly surreal plots, the impossibility of the events, the way the show progressively loses its grip on the rules of physical and social reality, all of it tracks the natural trajectory of a dreaming mind that has been unconscious for a very long time. Dreams start coherent and become strange. They incorporate fragments of ambient stimulation without context. They lose track of their own internal logic. They escalate beyond anything the waking world would permit because there is nobody awake to say no. That is not how things work. That is not possible. Come back to Earth. The dream just keeps going. And as the years pass and Homer's condition deteriorates, as the brain that is generating the dream becomes less and less capable of maintaining its internal consistency, the dream becomes stranger, more disconnected, more populated with famous faces from whatever is playing on the television in the hospital room. More willing to bend and break the rules that the earlier dream, the lucid dream of the first 4 seasons, was still trying to respect. There is a detail that the theory's proponents point to that predates the coma episode by exactly 6 months, and once you notice it, it has a quality that is hard to describe except as quietly devastating. In the season 4 premiere, which aired in September 1992, Homer has a conversation with God. A face-to-face conversation. A real one within the logic of the show, not a dream or a hallucination. Homer and God speak, and during that conversation, God tells Homer something. He tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life. But not yet. God says Homer's time is coming. Not in the sense of an upcoming revelation or a future spiritual experience. In the sense of a clock running down. In the sense of something about to happen. God is, in this reading, not making a promise. God is delivering a warning. Homer's time, his waking time, his conscious time is nearly up. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline matches with a precision that is difficult to attribute to coincidence. God told Homer in September of 1992 that his time was coming. In April of 1993, Homer's time came. The vending machine fell. The brain lost 5% of itself. And somewhere in that hospital, in a room with machines beeping their quiet rhythms and curtains drawn against the afternoon sun, the dreaming began. And has not stopped since. The aging problem is the piece of evidence that the coma theory handles most elegantly, more elegantly than any other theory that attempts to explain it. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle. The show uses the floating timeline to hand-wave the mechanics of this, but the question of why remains, and every theory has its own answer. The radiation theory says that chronic exposure to nuclear contamination has altered the resident's biology at the cellular level, preventing normal aging. This is internally consistent but requires a specific kind of cellular mutation that would need to be universal across every resident of the town, including people who arrived recently and people who live far from the plant. The cartoon logic explanation says that it is simply how animated shows work, that characters in animation do not age unless the story requires it, that this is a production convention and not a narrative mystery. But the coma theory has the answer that is simultaneously the simplest and the most emotionally precise. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993 and has no way of knowing what happened after that. Of course, his children do not age. His brain cannot imagine them older because he was not there to see them grow. His wife does not age because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly like that, and the dreaming mind can only build from what it already holds. His friends, his neighbors, his entire town, they are all exactly what they were on the day the vending machine fell, because that is the last day Homer's waking memory was updated. The coma dream preserves his world exactly as it was on the day he lost it. Not because the dream is kind, because the dream has nothing else to work with. Every birthday his children have had since April 1993 has happened without him. Every year his wife has grown older has happened without him. Every change in every face he loves has happened in a room he cannot access, in the waking world he cannot get back to. And so in the dream, none of it happens. In the dream, the children are always young, and the wife is always how he remembers her, and the house on Evergreen Terrace always looks the same, and the beer is always cold, and nobody is ever any older than the last day Monty Homer was paying attention. This is not a wonderful thing. This is a man who cannot grow his family because he cannot reach them. The celebrity appearances in later seasons, which have always struck viewers as a strange and sometimes desperate quality of the show, make a different kind of sense through the coma lens. Homer's brain, lying in that hospital bed, is not completely shut off from the outside world. It is receiving input. The television in the hospital room is playing. Visitors at his bedside are having conversations. Nurses and doctors are speaking to each other in the hallway. The radio is on somewhere. The ambient noise of the waking world is filtering through and reaching the dreaming mind, incomplete and fragmented like signals coming through static. Names, voices, fragments of music, half-overheard conversations about people and places and cultural events that Homer's brain is absorbing without context and weaving into the dream, where they appear as characters, as guest appearances, as famous faces showing up in Springfield for no particular reason, except that Homer's dreaming brain heard something and had to put it somewhere. Every celebrity who has ever appeared in Springfield, from the early guest spots in the classic era to the flood of famous faces in later seasons, is in this reading a voice that filtered through the phone. A piece of the outside world that made it in. A signal that the dreaming mind caught and translated into a face and a name and a handful of lines of dialogue before the signal moved on and the dream closed over it. Homer is not ignoring the outside world. He cannot hear it clearly enough to understand it. He can only incorporate it. The show has, in its own way, acknowledged this theory. In a season 34 episode, a scene was released that depicted Homer waking up from a long coma, with the framing suggesting that everything since season 4 had been a dream. The scene was presented as a fake deleted scene, a hoax planted by hackers, something the show's writers attributed to outside interference and denied as official content. But they made it. Someone sat down and wrote it, and someone animated it, and someone voiced it, and the result was a fully realized version of the thing that the coma theory had been arguing for years, rendered in the show's actual style by the show's actual creators, wrapped in a denial that felt, to many who watched it, less like a refutation and more like a confession. You show someone the truth and then tell them it is a joke. You let them see what is actually there and then take it away. And they laugh and they move on, just like Homer laughed when he was told he had lost 5% of his brain and the family found it charming and the episode ended. The show will never confirm the coma theory. It cannot. The moment it confirms the coma theory, it has to deal with the logical consequence of the confirmation, which is an ending. The waking, the reunion, the terrible arithmetic of time past and what has changed and what has not. The moment when a man who has been dreaming of his family for 30 years finally opens his eyes and has to find out who they actually are now. The show cannot survive that moment. So it keeps the dream running, it keeps the loop going, it keeps Homer asleep. If the coma theory is true, and I want to say plainly that whether it is true in the literal sense is less interesting than whether it is emotionally true, then the show's entire emotional core is something other than what it presents itself as. It presents itself as a comedy, a satire, a show about the chaotic love of a deeply imperfect family. If the theory is true, it is a vigil, It is 36 years of a man's unconscious mind refusing to let the story end, refusing to let his children grow up and leave, refusing to let his wife age and move on and live the life that goes forward from the moment the vending machine fell. The dream keeps running because something in Homer's brain needs it to keep running. The dream is not a refuge from a difficult life. The dream is the only place where the life Homer values most is still intact, still whole, still happening in real time, still needing him, still organized around his presence in a way the waking world may no longer be. Every time Homer finds his way home at the end of an episode, every time the family gathers on the couch and the tension resolves, and the music swells in that particular way that signals everything is fine, that is a man dreaming himself back to the people he loves. Not because the dream is happy, because the alternative is waking up and finding out how much of it he missed. Let the thoughts get a little softer now. You have been following this for a while and you have done well, but there is no need to hold it all tight in your mind. Let it be loose. Let it settle like something settling to the bottom of a still body of water, finding its level, finding its place. The coma theory, the tire fire, the yellow families, the cooling towers breathing steam into the dark. Let it all be there without needing to be organized. Homer is in the hospital. The dream is running. The family is on the couch. In Evergreen Terrace in Springfield, wherever Springfield is, the lights are off and the television is on and something soft is playing, and outside the window, the nuclear plant is on the horizon. Just like always. Section 4. The Burns Equation. Immortality as Industry. Let us talk about the oldest man in Springfield. Not the oldest man by official record, not the oldest man according to any birth certificate or municipal file or document of any kind that anyone could produce and point to. The oldest man in the sense that matters in a place like Springfield, which is the oldest man in terms of what he remembers and what he has done and how long the arm of his influence has been reaching into the lives of everyone around him. Charles Montgomery Burns. The show has never committed to a specific birth year for Burns, which is itself a deliberate choice, a way of keeping the question open without ever having to answer it. But the cumulative evidence of what Burns has described across dozens of episodes places his birth somewhere in the 1880s or very early 1890s. He has spoken of events from before the turn of the 20th century as personal memories. He has described his early adult life in terms that place it in the 1910s. He served in World War II, which he appears to have done in a capacity so morally complex that the show wisely declines to specify it in detail. He attended Yale. He knew Howard Hughes. He has referred to the Gilded Age not as a historical period he read about, but as a time he was present for. By the most conservative possible reading of the show's scattered, contradictory timeline, Burns is somewhere between 100 and 130 years old. By the more liberal readings, the ones that try to accommodate the full span of what he has claimed to personally remember, he might be pushing 150. He is not, in any biological sense, supposed to be here. In an episode from the show's 8th season, a doctor delivers what may be the most memorable medical diagnosis in the history of the program. Burns has come in for a checkup, and the doctor emerges from the examination room with the look of a man who has seen something he cannot fully process. The news, he explains, is both very bad and very good. And the reason it is both simultaneously is that they are the same piece of information viewed from two different directions. Burns has every disease known to medical science. Every single one, not in sequence, not alternating, but present simultaneously. All of them active, all of them doing whatever it is they do to the body that hosts them. Burns is carrying a complete catalog of human illness, from the common to the exotic, all coexisting within the same frail, ancient body. The reason this has not killed him, the doctor explains, is that it is killing him in too many ways at once. Every disease that should be progressing, that should be gaining dominance over his biology, is being blocked by every other disease that is trying to do the same thing. They are jammed together in a doorway, each one pushing, none of them getting through. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. 3 people trying to fit through a door simultaneously, so thoroughly wedged that none of them can move. Burns is the sickest man in the United States, and paradoxically, functionally indestructible. The show plays this for laughs and moves on, but the laughter fades and the logic remains, and the logic is not funny at all. Consider what the weekly radiation treatment actually implies. Burns requires a specific medical intervention administered on a precise weekly schedule. Miss one treatment, and he dies. The margin for error is zero. His life is not sustained by the normal biological processes that keep the rest of humanity functional. It is maintained artificially through an external input that his body has become dependent on to the degree that removing it even briefly would trigger systemic collapse. The treatment involves radiation, controlled radiation, targeted and calibrated and administered by physicians who understand exactly what they are doing. But radiation nonetheless. The man who owns a nuclear power plant whose facility has been discharging radioactive material into the water supply and the air and the soil of Springfield for decades is personally dependent on controlled exposure to radioactive material to maintain his own biological function. Burns is not separate from the radiation loop. Burns is inside it. He is, in a very literal physiological sense, part of the same system that the power plant represents. The plant produces radiation. The radiation flows out into Springfield in the form of contamination, altering biology, degrading cognition, changing the chemistry of the water and the air and the living organisms that move through both. And some portion of that same energy, controlled and measured and administered by private physicians in private clinics, flows back into Burns and keeps the machinery of his impossibly old body running for one more week. The power plant does not just keep Burns wealthy. The power plant keeps Burns alive. This creates a relationship between Burns and Springfield that goes much deeper than employer and community. It is more interdependent than that, more entangled. The town and the man who owns its primary source of power are connected in ways that extend into biology, into the very cellular mechanics of survival. Springfield needs the plant for its electricity. Burns needs the plant for his life. The plant needs Burns's fortune to maintain its infrastructure and avoid the shutdowns that its 342 violations would otherwise trigger. And the population of Springfield, cognitively impaired by chronic low-level radiation exposure from the same plant that provides their power and extends their employer's lifespan, lacks the capacity to see the loop clearly enough to break it. This is the Burns equation, a closed circuit of dependency and damage, self-sustaining and self-concealing, in which every element reinforces every other element, and the whole system perpetuates itself with the mechanical inevitability of a nuclear reaction that has been going for so long that nobody living can remember when it started. There is the matter of Smithers, and what Smithers' devotion actually represents when you look at it through this lens. Waylon Smithers has been Charles Montgomery Burns's personal assistant for the entire run of the show. His loyalty to Burns is total, unconditional, and frequently described in terms that exceed professional devotion and enter the territory of something more complex and more personal. The show has handled this relationship with varying degrees of directness over the years, but whatever else Smithers' feelings for Burns consist of, what is functionally undeniable within the show's own canon is that Smithers' continued presence is a medical necessity. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. He ensures Burns makes every weekly treatment appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that borders on obsession. He is, in operational terms, the human interface between Burns and the medical infrastructure that keeps Burns running. He knows the protocols. He knows the schedule. He knows what happens if a dose is missed, which is that Burns dies. And he carries that knowledge as a weight that shapes every professional interaction he has ever had. If Smithers ever left, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally helpless. Physically helpless in the most literal sense. Without Smithers navigating the treatment schedule, without Smithers managing the pharmaceutical logistics that keep the disease equilibrium from collapsing, Burns would miss an appointment. The diseases would surge. Every illness that has been held in check by every other illness would find the opening it has been waiting for, and the whole impossible biological balancing act would end. Smithers is not devoted to Burns because he cannot imagine working for anyone else. Smithers is devoted to Burns because he is the only person in Springfield who fully understands the machinery of Burns's survival, and he knows that walking away is the same thing as pulling the plug. This is not a love story. This is a hostage situation that both parties have chosen to rationalize as something else. Burns's connection to the broader sweep of American history adds a layer to the immortality question that the show raises and then consistently refuses to resolve. He has described personal involvement in events spanning from the late 19th century to the present day. He knew the robber barons, and not as historical figures. He knew them as contemporaries, as colleagues, as the kind of men he recognized himself in. He attended events that would now be in history textbooks as formative moments of industrial America. He moved through the early 20th century with the ease of someone for whom the transition from the horse-drawn era to the automobile age was something they simply watched from a window while drinking very old brandy. He was present in ways that a man born in the 1880s could only remain present for if he were still alive, still functional, still operating at a level of cognitive clarity that the passage of a century and a half should have made impossible by any biological reasoning. And yet, there he is, in every episode, sharp-minded and ruthless and possessed of a strategic intelligence that none of the people around him can match, operating his billion-dollar empire with the focused attention of someone who has been paying attention to the dynamics of power for much, much longer than anyone else in the room. The question that haunts the edges of this is whether Burns is unique, whether his longevity is a personal achievement, an individual anomaly produced by his specific fortune and his specific willingness to do what it takes, or whether the Burns dynasty, the family lineage that the show establishes as one of the oldest and most continuously powerful in American history, has always had access to something that ordinary people have not. Whether previous generations of the Burns family used different methods, whatever methods were available in their respective eras, to maintain the kind of hold-on power that only works if someone at the top lives long enough to remember where all the bodies are buried. The show never answers this, but it does establish that the Burns family has been in continuous control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed, and that kind of continuity does not happen through normal generational succession. Normal generational succession involves passing power to someone who does not remember where you buried everything. There is something almost restful about Burns when you look at him from far enough away. Not restful in the sense of comfortable or kind. Restful in the sense of settled. In the sense of a thing that has been in one place for so long that it has become part of the landscape, indistinguishable from the ground it sits on. Burns has been in Springfield for longer than anyone can verify. He has been at the center of the town's economic life for longer than the oldest resident can remember. He is the constant around which everything else in Springfield arranges itself, the fixed point in a geography that refuses to stay fixed, the one element in the equation that does not change because it has arranged its own immortality with the same methodical thoroughness it has brought to every other project it has undertaken. He is the oldest thing in Springfield. He might be the oldest thing in America. And every light in every window on Evergreen Terrace runs on power generated in his facility, which means that every night in Springfield, every quiet night when the families are asleep and the streets are empty and only the cooling towers are still breathing, Burns is present. His energy is present. His power is present, coursing through the walls and the wires of every home in town, keeping the lights off and the refrigerators cold and the televisions in standby mode, waiting for morning. He is not separate from Springfield. He is Springfield. The plant is the town's heart, and Burns is the plant. And the heart has been beating for 130 years and shows no sign of stopping. Let the thought of it become soft. The cooling towers in the dark, the steam rising, the lights in the plant windows always on. The old man in his mansion on the hill with the skeleton of a boy he loved long ago preserved in a display case. The machines that keep him running, that keep the schedule that Smithers maintains, the disease equilibrium, the weekly glow. It is, in its way, a kind of stillness, terrible and ancient and perfectly preserved, like Springfield itself. Section 5. Who really pulled the trigger? In the summer of 1995, something happened on American television that had never happened before on an animated show. A mystery. A real one, designed to be solved, designed with clues and red herrings and misdirection, aired in front of the largest primetime audience a cartoon had ever reached, and left them with a question over the summer. Who shot Mr. Burns? The show had done the setup with the kind of meticulous craft that the writers were capable of at the peak of their powers, establishing motive for every major character in Springfield, escalating the stakes until they reached the point of genuine dramatic tension, and then ending on a note of violent ambiguity that left the country talking. It was a cultural event. Fox treated it like one. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special treating the fictional crime as a real unsolved case. A national contest invited viewers to submit their theories, with the winner to be animated into a future episode. The answer came in September 1995. The shooter was Maggie Simpson, an infant. The gun had fallen from Burns's holster during a struggle over a lollipop. Maggie had picked it up and the gun had gone off. Case closed. Baby did it. Except. Let us take the clues one at a time, the way a careful person would, without rushing, without the pressure of a summer deadline and a national contest, and a viewing public that wanted an answer. Burns collapses in the town square after being shot. He stumbles to the sundial in the center and falls, his hands landing on two letters, W and S, or from Burns's own perspective, as he looks up at the dial M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. This is presented as a dying man's attempt to identify his attacker. But Burns himself, later in the episode, when he wakes up and recounts what happened, states explicitly that the position of his hands on the sundial was not intentional. He did not arrange his fall to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell. The sundial was where he happened to land. The central clue in the greatest mystery in the show's history is, by the victim's own account, meaningless. A coincidence. The showrunners built a summer-long cultural event around a piece of evidence that the person the evidence supposedly came from describes as an accident. Then there is the question of what Burns said in the moment before he was shot. "Oh, it is you." That is what he said. Not an expression of surprise or fear, not a reaction to unexpected violence. A calm recognition. The kind of recognition you have when someone you know appears somewhere you did not expect them but were not alarmed to see them. Oh, it is you. A phrase that implies familiarity. A phrase that implies that whoever was standing there, Burns had a prior relationship with them, knew their face, associated it with something other than mortal threat. Does Mr. Burns know Maggie Simpson? He barely knows Homer, and Homer has worked for him for over 2 decades. Burns regularly forgets Homer's name, forgets his face, treats him as an interchangeable unit in the labor pool rather than a specific human being with a history and a family and a 30-year record of employment. The idea that Burns would see Maggie, a baby he has essentially never interacted with, and respond with the quiet familiarity of, "Oh, it is you," requires a suspension of everything the show has established about how Burns processes human beings. The gun is the other piece that does not quite fit. Burns carried a gun in a holster. In the episode leading up to the shooting, that holster is shown empty. The gun was already gone before the attack. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, which means the shooter did not come to the confrontation armed. They did not plan to shoot anyone. They came to wherever they were, found Burns's gun on the ground or in Burns's vicinity and used it impulsively or accidentally. Most of the people who had motive to want Burns shot came to the town meeting with weapons. They were angry enough and prepared enough to have brought their own. The person who shot Burns was someone who did not plan to shoot anyone, who encountered Burns and a gun at the same time, and in whose hands the gun then discharged. A baby finding a gun on the ground and being unable to control whether it fires is consistent with this. So is a dozen other scenarios involving adults who did not plan to be shooters. There is Homer's confession in season 18. It is a throwaway moment. Homer, in conversation with another character, claims that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says it out loud, on screen, in a line that the show gives him with no particular dramatic weight and no follow-up. Nobody investigates this. Nobody reopens the case. Nobody even seems to register that Homer has just confessed to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield. 2 readings present themselves. Homer is lying for attention. which is consistent with his character and his history of making implausible claims to seem more interesting than he believes himself to be. In this reading, the confession is a joke, a character moment, a nothing. Or Homer did it. And somewhere in the 30 seasons between the shooting and the confession, something in the accumulated weight of the thing finally came out in a room where nobody was paying close enough attention to press him on it. If Homer did it, then Maggie was framed. A baby was blamed for a crime her father committed, and the reason the official verdict held is the same reason Chief Wiggum gave it when he closed the case. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect fall person, too young to contest the accusation, too young to understand what she was being accused of, too young to be punished, and, in a town whose institutional memory resets between episodes, too young to ever have to live with the label. The Marge theory is the one that the evidence supports most persistently, and it is the one that requires the most uncomfortable engagement with what the show has established about Burns's interior life. Burns, in a season 4 episode, falls in love with Marge. His obsession is genuine within the show's logic, real enough to alter his behavior and create narrative tension that runs across multiple scenes. He is drawn to her in a way that is inconsistent with his normal relationship to other humans, which tends toward contempt punctuated by indifference. Marge, in the timeline of the Who Shot Burns story, had watched Burns systematically destroy things she loved. Her children's school lost its funding because Burns stole the oil well beneath it. Her family's dog was injured. Her son's extracurricular life was gutted. Her husband was pushed to a breaking point by decades of being ignored by his employer. Burns blocked out the sun over the town where Marge's family lived, and in doing so demonstrated that there was no limit to what he was willing to take from the people around him. The Marge theory proposes that she was the shooter, and that Burns, upon recognizing her as the woman he had been infatuated with, declined to identify her. He pointed at the sundial. He let the town draw its own conclusions. He protected her the way you protect someone you cannot bear to see imprisoned, even after they have put a bullet in you, and Maggie was blamed because Maggie was available, and because a baby cannot be prosecuted, and because the real shooter needed to be protected, and because in Springfield the official answer and the correct answer have always been allowed to exist in separate rooms without ever being introduced to each other. The contest that Fox ran across the summer of 1995, the national invitation to solve the mystery with the promise that the winner would be animated into the show, produced a result that is, in retrospect, deeply telling. According to the DVD commentary, of the randomly sampled entries submitted across the summer, not a single person guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The prize was eventually awarded randomly to someone who had not gotten it right, and that person received a cash payment instead of the animated appearance because they did not have the right answer. The writers were aware of one person, exactly one, who had posted the correct solution to an online message board on the night the first episode aired. This person was using a college internet account. By the time the contest closed and the producers tried to track them down, the account was no longer active. The one person who figured it out became permanently unreachable. The show issued an open invitation on the DVD release for this person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what that means. The show's creators designed a mystery, publicized it as solvable from the clues in Part 1, ran a national contest around it, and when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody who entered the contest had solved it. The clues did not lead to the answer in the way the show implied they would. The answer did not follow logically from the evidence that was available. And the one person who did solve it disappeared into the early internet without a trace, leaving behind only the record of a correct answer that was never properly claimed. The greatest mystery in the show's history was never actually solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, as a certain episode about a principal and an imposter will tell us later, those are two very different things. The final shot of the Who Shot Burns resolution shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone else has left. She looks around carefully, checking to make sure no one is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as a confession. Maggie knows what she did. Maggie is, in some pre-verbal, instinctive way, aware of her own violence and aware that it should be kept secret. But watch it again. Watch a baby who has just seen something happen. Watch the way a very young child processes an event they did not fully understand by physically imitating it after the fact. The way small children rehearse things they have witnessed, running them again in simplified form, using their own bodies as the stage. Maggie is not confessing. Maggie is remembering. She watched someone shoot Burns. She does not entirely understand what she watched, but her body remembers the motion, the way a child's body remembers anything it has observed closely. And in the empty room, with no one watching, she runs it again. The show gives you both readings simultaneously and never resolves the ambiguity, which is, if you think about it, the most honest thing the show could possibly have done with its greatest mystery. The answer is in the room. It has always been in the room. But the room is Springfield, and in Springfield, the truth is welcome to stay for as long as it likes, just as long as it never, ever announces itself. Section 6, Maggie's Long Game. Consider what we know about Maggie Simpson in terms of observable facts, setting aside for a moment every theory and every frame of interpretation, and just looking at what the show has documented over 36 years. She is 1-year-old. She has been 1-year-old since 1989, and she will be 1-year-old for as long as the show runs, which may be indefinitely. She communicates primarily through pacifier movements and facial expressions, with occasional sounds that might be words, or might be approximations of words, or might be something more deliberate than either. Her first word, Daddy, was spoken exactly once and voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in an episode that treated the moment with the reverence of a cameo and then never mentioned it again. She saved her family from a car rolling toward a cliff by grabbing the steering wheel and driving, alone as an infant, and managing it without incident. She organized and led a successful rebellion against an authoritarian daycare administrator in a short film that was nominated for an Academy Award. She outmaneuvered the full security apparatus of the Ayn Rand School for Tots, which is not an institution known for being outwitted by the babies it houses. She has been tested for intelligence, and the results, when the show chooses to engage with them, are consistently off the available charts. She protected a caterpillar from a bully and a hostile institutional environment in a way that required multi-step planning, adaptive problem-solving, spatial reasoning, and the ability to predict other people's behavior before they enacted it. And she is 1-year-old. 1-year-old and cannot reliably walk without falling. 1-year-old and has not developed language in any meaningful or sustained way. 1-year-old and is, by every metric the show has established, the most functionally capable member of the Simpson family. The silence is the key, not the silence as inability, not the silence as developmental delay or biological limitation or any of the things that the adults in Springfield have tacitly agreed to assume it represents. The silence as strategy. The silence as the most sophisticated decision any member of the Simpson family has ever made. Look at what intelligence cost the people around Maggie. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. Lisa's intellect is one of the most consistently established facts in the show's entire canon, referenced and demonstrated in episode after episode across every season. Lisa is the smartest person in her family by a wide margin, and probably the smartest person in Springfield, and possibly one of the smarter people in the entire state, wherever the state currently is. And that intelligence has bought her isolation, frustration, and a lifetime of being the person in the room who understands exactly what is wrong and cannot make anyone else care enough to fix it. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges the accepted version of events and gets dismissed. Lisa tries to make things better and gets worn down by the weight of a community that has no structural incentive to improve. Her brilliance is her greatest gift and her greatest burden simultaneously, and the burden is heavy precisely because she carries it visibly. She announces herself. She insists on being noticed for what she is. Maggie has been watching this happen since the day she was born. She came into the world already in possession of the family's genetic inheritance of intelligence, possibly amplified to something beyond what Lisa has. And she opened her eyes and she saw what was already happening to her sister. She saw what being the smartest person in a room that does not reward intelligence actually looks like from the inside. She saw the cost. And she decided not to pay it. What Maggie is doing, if the theory holds, is something that requires a cognitive sophistication that is quite literally breathtaking in a creature that has not yet completed its first year of development. She is performing infancy, performing helplessness, performing the expected behaviors of a very small child. The pacifier, the stumble, the apparent inability to communicate beyond basic sounds, all of it deliberately maintained as a disguise behind which something much more capable and much more patient is waiting. The disguise works because of what everyone around her expects. They expect a baby. They see a baby. They act accordingly, speaking frankly in front of her because she could not possibly understand, ignoring her reactions because she could not possibly be reacting to what they think she is reacting to, treating her as a passive presence in the household, rather than an active observer with full comprehension of everything being said and done in her vicinity. Every heroic thing Maggie has ever done has happened in spaces where this expectation was intact. The daycare rebellion succeeded because adults do not monitor infants carefully enough to see them organizing. The car on the cliff was handled before anyone realized there was a driving infant in the front seat. Burns was shot or was in the room when Burns was shot, or was the one who saw who did it, and none of that has ever been properly investigated because who seriously investigates a baby? The invisibility is armor. The silence is power. And behind it, behind the pacifier and the enormous eyes and 36 years of performed helplessness, something is watching. Something has been watching this whole time. Something that has cataloged every injustice, absorbed every detail, processed every piece of information, that has moved through the Simpson household and the Springfield community around it, and has been holding all of it in reserve. For what? The show has never told us. And that may be the most interesting thing about Maggie. Not what she has done, but what she has not done yet. Not the capacities she has demonstrated, but the full scope of the capacities she is still choosing not to reveal. Let us apply the radiation theory here because it offers something elegant. If the Springfield nuclear power plant's contamination has been altering the biology of everyone who lives near it, and if those alterations express differently in different people depending on their specific genetic makeup, their age at the time of exposure, and the particular way their biology interacts with the radiation, then what we should expect to see is a spectrum of effects rather than a uniform one. Homer represents one end of the spectrum. Whatever the radiation has done to him in combination with the crayon and the decades of cumulative cognitive damage from living in close proximity to an active reactor, the result is a severe reduction in intellectual function. Homer is not stupid by nature. The show has established that clearly enough. Homer without the crayon is brilliant, articulate, and capable of understanding the world around him with a precision that his normal state never permits. Homer is what happens when the same environment that produces extraordinary intelligence in some people produces its opposite in others. Maggie is the other end. Same environment, same water, same air, same irradiated skyline, same family genetics expressing themselves in a body that has been bathed in low-level radiation from its earliest moments of development. But where Homer's neural architecture was degraded, Maggie's was amplified. Where the radiation took something away from her father, it gave something extraordinary to his youngest daughter. Not as a gift, not as a compensation or a cosmic correction, just as the random, imprecise expression of mutation across a population, producing outcomes across a full spectrum from terrible to remarkable with no particular preference for either. Homer and Maggie are two poles of the same phenomenon. The radiation made him less than he should have been and made her more than should be possible. And neither of them, for entirely different reasons, can ever fully use what they have. Homer because he chose the fog. Maggie because she has chosen to wait. There is a version of Maggie's future that the show has gestured toward without ever committing to it. Flash-forward episodes, future-set stories, what-if scenarios that the show occasionally uses to imagine its characters grown up and out of Springfield and into whatever their lives become when the floating timeline finally releases them. In these futures, the Maggie that appears is never quite what you expect. She is not the genius who saved the world. She is not the revolutionary who changed Springfield. She is quieter than that, more settled, more like someone who arrived at exactly where she intended to be and found it was exactly enough. The show cannot fully commit to Maggie's potential because committing to it would require explaining it. And explaining it would require opening the conversation about what Springfield does to its residents in a direct way that the show has spent 36 years approaching from the side rather than head on. So Maggie stays 1 year old. She stays silent. And behind the enormous eyes, behind the pacifier that has been moving in that slow, rhythmic pulse since 1989, something continues to accumulate. Experience, observation, understanding. The long, patient gathering of everything that Springfield has to offer in the way of data about how power works and who holds it, and what happens to the people who challenge it, and what happens to the people who do not. When Maggie finally decides what to do with all of that, Springfield will not see it coming. She will have made sure of that. Take a slow breath. Let the image of Maggie settle somewhere in the back of your mind. The enormous eyes. The pacifier. The stillness that is not stillness at all, but rather the most sophisticated performance of stillness you have ever witnessed. She has been watching you too, watching the audience. 36 years of being watched by everyone who has ever sat in front of the television on Sunday night, and she has been watching back from behind the pacifier from the corner of the frame, cataloging what the audience notices and what it does not, what it cares about and what it ignores, what it chooses to find charming rather than extraordinary. The baby is fine. The baby is more than fine. The baby is waiting for you to go to sleep. Section 7. The Tamzarian Confession. How Springfield Erases Truth. In September 1997, an episode of The Simpsons aired that divided the show's fan base so sharply and so permanently that nearly 30 years later, the divide has not healed. The episode is The Principal and the Pauper. It is the second episode of the 9th season. And before I tell you what happens in it, I want to say something that the episode's detractors have consistently failed to account for, which is that this episode is not a mistake. It is a confession. Springfield, through this episode, confessed to exactly what it is and exactly how it works. And the audience responded with outrage, and the outrage has persisted for decades. And the outrage is itself part of the confession. Because the outrage is exactly what Springfield would generate in any real community that suddenly found itself watching the machinery of its own denial operate in plain view. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds a ceremony honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. It is a warm occasion. The community is gathered. Skinner is being celebrated in the specific way that Springfield celebrates its own, with a mixture of genuine affection and the particular kind of civic pride that small communities develop for the institutions that define them. And then a stranger walks in. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real one, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was presumed dead after being captured as a prisoner of war. He survived. He escaped. He came home to find that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. He is not from Springfield. He did not serve in the military as Skinner. He was a petty criminal from a difficult background who was drafted into the army, served alongside the real Skinner, and when Skinner was captured and presumed killed, felt guilty enough to travel to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother. Skinner's mother, Agnes, assumed Tamzarian was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never had a family or a home or an identity worth keeping, simply went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He wore the name and the history and the relationships for 20 years until the real article walked through the door. Now here is the part that matters. The town holds a meeting. Everyone is present. The truth has been fully exposed. Every person in Springfield knows with certainty that their principal is not who he is claimed to be, that the man who has been running their school for 2 decades built that position on a foundation of stolen identity. They vote, not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on whether to restore the real Skinner's identity. They vote on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie by. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree that Tamzarian is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his name and his life appropriated by a stranger, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And Judge Snyder makes it explicitly illegal to ever speak of this matter again, under penalty of torture. Let that settle. A town collectively decided that the truth was less important than their comfort. They had definitive proof that a major public figure in their community had been living a stolen identity. They had the person whose identity was stolen standing in front of them, and they chose the fake. They chose the lie, they exiled the truth, and made speaking it a crime. The audience responded with fury. Critics called it the worst episode of the series, the moment the show stopped caring about its own history, a betrayal of a character whose entire existence had been built on a foundation that was now retroactively fiction. Harry Shearer, the actor who voices Skinner, publicly criticized the decision. Fans ranked it among the most misguided things the show had ever done, and the show, to its credit, did not walk it back. It left the decree in place. Tamzarian remained Skinner. The real Skinner remained exiled. And Springfield continued as if none of it had happened, because Springfield had officially decided that none of it had happened, and in Springfield, official decisions of that nature tend to stick. What the audience was angry about, what continues to generate angry retrospectives nearly 3 decades later, is the sense that the episode broke the contract, that the show owed its audience consistency, continuity, respect for the shared investment they had made in these characters, and that revealing Skinner as Tamzarian was a withdrawal from an account that the show had been building for years. But here's the thing, that is the point. The episode is about exactly that experience. It is about a community that encounters the truth about the foundation of something they have built their affection and trust around, and in the face of that truth chooses comfort, chooses the version they prefer, makes the lie official, and exiles the facts. The fans' reaction to the episode was structurally identical to the Springfield community's reaction to the real Skinner. Here is something that disrupts the comfortable story we have been telling. We vote to reject it. We vote to continue with the version we prefer. And if that means something true gets tied to a train and sent away, so be it. Springfield wasn't behaving out of character. Springfield was behaving exactly as it always has. The difference is that this time, the show made you watch the vote. This episode is, under the framework of every other theory we have discussed tonight, the most important episode in the show's history. Not the funniest, not the most beloved, not the most cited or quoted or culturally significant, the most important, because it is the only episode that explains the machinery. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets to normal after something world-altering happens, the forgetting happens between episodes. You watch the catastrophe, you watch the episode end, you watch the next episode begin with everything restored. And the show treats this as the natural order of things, as the expected behavior of a world built on episodic storytelling conventions. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode where you watch the forgetting happen in real time. You watch the meeting, you watch the vote, you watch the legal decree, you watch the exile. You see the full process by which Springfield makes inconvenient truth officially into fiction and moves on, and you see that the process is deliberate and communal and requires the active participation of essentially every person in town. Springfield does not forget because its residents are cognitively impaired by radiation, though they may be. Springfield does not forget because Homer is dreaming and his brain cannot hold contradictory information, though that may also be true. Springfield forgets because Springfield votes to forget. Because the community has determined, at some level that precedes explicit discussion, that maintaining the agreed-upon version of events is more important than the discomfort of confronting the actual ones. And anyone who insists on the actual ones gets tied to a train. Consider how many times in Springfield's history truth has been expelled in exactly this way. The three-eyed fish story broke through the surface for a moment, and then sank without investigation when Burns ate Blinky on television, and the news cycle moved on. The dome came down and went up, and the EPA quarantined the town, and then the dome was gone and the town was restored, and nobody filed any reports or initiated any ongoing studies. Burns was shot by someone, and an infant was blamed, and the case was closed, and in 18 seasons nobody reopened it. Homer's mother was a fugitive for decades because a powerful man decided she was a threat, and the system honored that decision until the day she died. And Homer worked for that man his entire adult life, and never quite managed to connect those two facts into the indictment they represent. The truth keeps arriving, and the community keeps voting it out. Not through stupidity, not through simple negligence, but through the active, organized, collectively enforced choice to maintain the story that permits the town to continue functioning. Because functioning requires the plant, and the plant requires Burns, and Burns requires the silence of everyone who lives in the contamination zone. And the silence is maintained by a social contract so deep and so old that nobody alive can remember when it was first agreed to. The real Seymour Skinner is still out there, somewhere, tied to a train that has been moving since 1997, carrying the truth away from Springfield at whatever speed truth travels when a town has officially outlawed it. The last honest man in a place that made honesty a crime. There is a reading of this episode that connects to the coma theory in a way that is almost too precise to feel accidental. If everything since April 1993 is Homer's dream, then the story Homer's unconscious mind invented in Season 9 is the story of a man living inside a stolen identity that has been ratified by collective agreement. Tamzarian became Skinner because Springfield needed him to be Skinner. The fake became real, not through any process of genuine change, but through the force of communal insistence. Homer's coma dream is itself a stolen identity of this kind. The life being lived in the dream is not the life Homer is actually living. The Homer in the dream is not the Homer in the hospital bed. The dream Homer is a performance, a simulation, a Tamzarian-style replacement for the real person who is lying somewhere in Springfield General, machines breathing for him, time passing around him, the real world continuing without him. And the dream works. The simulation holds as long as nobody in it questions whether it is real. As long as Springfield votes to maintain the fiction. As long as the truth, the real life, the actual passage of time, and the actual aging of the actual family stays exiled on the train. Homer's dream needs the Tamzarian verdict. He needs to believe that fake lives can become real through collective agreement. He needs to believe that the Springfield he is dreaming is the Springfield that exists. And as long as the dream Springfield keeps voting to sustain the fiction, he does not have to wake up. The Principal and the Pauper is Springfield's operating manual, the instruction guide for how to maintain an impossible reality through the organized suppression of incompatible facts. It is not a bad episode. It is the most Springfield episode the show ever made. Section 8. Mona, Burns, and the Architecture of Grief. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told his son that she died when Homer was young. He had shown Homer a grave. Homer had mourned in the way that Homer mourns things, which is to say imperfectly and incompletely, and with a grief that surfaces sideways in behavior rather than directly in words, expressed through his desperate hunger for approval and his terror of being left alone and his inability to fully believe that anyone who loves him will not eventually leave. Homer Simpson is, under the surface comedy, a man shaped by loss, specifically by the loss of a mother who he believes chose to stop being present in his life. That belief, absorbed in childhood and never fully examined, is the substrate beneath every impulsive decision and every emotional overreaction and every moment of neediness that his family finds both exhausting and endearing. Homer is the person he is because of a story that turned out to be a lie. The episode that revealed this lie aired on November 19th, 1995. It is called Mother Simpson. It is, by wide consensus among the show's viewers and critics, one of the greatest episodes the show has ever produced. And I think that assessment is correct. And I think the reason for it is that the episode does something the show rarely does fully and without deflection, which is to sit with grief honestly, to look at what it actually costs a person to lose a parent, and to find them again and to lose them once more, and to not flinch away from any of it. Here is what the episode reveals. Homer goes to the Hall of Records in Springfield on a minor errand and discovers, by accident, that his mother is listed as alive. The grave Abe showed him was not his mother's grave. It was the grave of Walt Whitman. Abe had been directing his son's grief at a poet's headstone for the entirety of Homer's life. Homer finds his mother at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her dead son's grave. She does not recognize him at first. He is no longer the child she left. He has become someone she has only been able to imagine from a distance, watching from the margin of his life rather than its center. When Homer proves who he is, the reunion scene that follows is one of the show's finest pieces of sustained emotional writing. A grown man and his mother finding each other across 27 years of separation. And the scene does not undercut this with jokes. It does not deflect into absurdity. It lets the moment be what it is, which is enormous and tender and almost unbearably sad because they are finding each other in a graveyard beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them, surrounded by all the years they did not have. And then Mona tells Homer why she left. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was, by her own description, ordinary in the way that extraordinary people sometimes allow themselves to be before something changes them. The world outside Springfield was on fire in 1969. Civil rights, Vietnam, the counterculture. The particular American convulsion of that decade had not quite reached Evergreen Terrace, but it was coming, and Mona met people who were already living inside it, and something shifted. She joined a group of activists. She became radicalized in the way that people become radicalized when they encounter a cause that feels more urgent than the life they were living before it. And the cause they pursued brought them to a facility that the show reveals in terms that should stop you cold. Mr. Burns owned a biological weapons laboratory, not a nuclear power plant, not an industrial facility with safety violations. A laboratory specifically designed for the development of germ warfare agents. Weapons-grade pathogens. In Springfield. In the same town where Homer was growing up, where children were going to school, where families were eating meals around kitchen tables and watching television, and going about the ordinary business of their lives with no knowledge that the richest man in town was cultivating biological weapons down the road. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They detonated what the show calls an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological material inside. The raid was successful. The weapons were neutralized. And then Mona made a mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the K. She stopped, in a moment of instinct and humanity, to help the person nearest to her. That person was Mr. Burns. She helped him. She looked at his face. And Burns looked back, and he saw her, and he remembered her face for the next 27 years. He reported her to the FBI. She became a fugitive. She kissed her sleeping son goodbye and disappeared into the night. And Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Burns did not just identify Mona to the FBI, he pursued her. Actively, across decades, with the resources that only his particular level of wealth makes possible. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in Season 7, when she and Homer have their reunion, and the show allows them a brief period of being mother and son in the same city, Burns recognizes her through a cab window. He makes a call. The FBI appears at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother a second time, understanding now, for the first time, exactly why she left and exactly who made her. Homer knows who forced her out. He knows that the man responsible for the shape of his entire adult psychology, the man whose absence created the hollow that his hunger for approval has been trying to fill for 40 years, is not some abstract force or historical accident. He is a specific person. He is Homer's employer. He is the man who signs Homer's paycheck every week. And Homer does not connect the dots. Not in any way that results in confrontation or resignation or justice. The connection is there in the narrative, fully formed and plainly visible, and Homer looks at it, and his brain, the crayon-compromised brain, the radiation-damaged brain, the brain that chose stupidity because clarity was too painful, moves past it and settles back into the routine. He goes to work on Monday. He takes his seat in Sector 7G. He eats his donut. And the man across town who stole his mother watches the cooling towers breathe steam and keeps the treatment scheduled and lives another week. The show eventually reveals a layer beneath this that makes the whole architecture of Homer's situation even more precisely engineered. Burns committed a crime at some point in the past. The specifics vary in different tellings, but the essential structure is consistent. Burns did something that Abe Simpson discovered, or witnessed, or became aware of in a way that gave Abe leverage. And in exchange for Abe's silence, Burns made a guarantee. Homer would have a job at the power plant, no matter what. No matter how many mistakes, how many incidents, how many documented failures. 742 of them by the show's own count. Homer was never to be permanently dismissed. Homer's job security has always been presented as a cartoon convenience, a way of ensuring the show can keep sending Homer to the same workplace episode after episode without the logic of the real world intruding. But it is not a convenience. It is a contract, a deal brokered in silence between Homer's father and Homer's mother's persecutor, kept secret from Homer himself, maintained across decades without his knowledge. Homer was placed in that job by the man who destroyed his family. Homer has been kept in that job by a deal that his father made with that man. And Homer has never, in 36 years, been able to see the architecture of it clearly enough to understand what he is living inside. There is a version of Homer Simpson, demonstrated once and then deliberately buried, that is capable of seeing all of this. In a season 12 episode, Homer has the crayon removed from his brain. His IQ immediately rises to near genius levels. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding complex relationships between ideas and events in a way his normal state never permits. He sees Springfield clearly for the first time, and the clarity is devastating. He sees his job for what it is. He sees his life for what it is. He sees the gap between who he is and who he could have been. The gap that the crayon and the radiation and the 27 years of maternal absence have together created, and the gap is too wide to look across. So he has the crayon put back. He chooses the fog. He tells himself that being smart made him miserable, and that is true, but the misery was the specific misery of being able to see clearly in a situation that clarity cannot improve. Homer could not change what Burns did. Homer could not reclaim his mother or his potential or the decades that the system stole from him. All clarity could give him was the ability to understand exactly what he had lost. The fog is better. The fog is kinder. The fog is when you understand what is behind it, not stupidity at all. It is mercy. Mona Simpson died in a later season. The scene is quiet. It is given the space it deserves. Homer is with her. He holds her hand. He watches her go. And the show does not soften it with a joke or a cutaway. It lets it be a death scene. It lets it be a son watching his mother die. And the weight of everything that was taken from them, all the years and the ordinary moments and the birthdays and the dinners and the particular texture of being known by someone who has known you since before you knew yourself, settles over the scene without ever being named. The Simpsons has always been a comedy, but underneath the comedy, underneath every joke and pratfall and couch gag and treehouse of horror and celebrity cameo and cultural satire, there is this. There is a man who grew up believing his mother chose to leave him, who spent his whole adult life being shaped by that belief, whose entire personality is a response to a story that was a lie. There is a woman who spent 27 years underground because she helped someone who did not deserve it, who missed her son's entire childhood and his wedding and the births of his children because the man she helped remembered her face. There is Burns, alive still, presiding over the town, and the cooling towers still breathing into the dark sky above Evergreen Terrace, and the water still flowing downstream, and the family still on the couch, and Homer still going to work every morning to build the man who broke him, the wealth he needs to keep breathing. This is the show's deepest truth, not the jokes, not the satire, not the cultural commentary. This, a family, 3 generations of them, systematically broken by one man's unaccountable power, and the broken pieces arranged so neatly, so completely, so perfectly into the shape of something functional that from the outside, from the perspective of the audience watching through the television screen, it looks like a family. It looks like a comedy. It looks like everything is fine. Let your body settle a little more. Let the story of Mona and Homer and Burns and the architecture of everything that was taken from them drift toward the back of your mind, soft and heavy, finding its place in the dark. You are allowed to feel the weight of it without holding it tight. You are allowed to let it be sad without needing to resolve the sadness. That is what the show has always known, that the sadness and the comedy are not opposites. They are the same thing, lit from different angles. Springfield is the place where you laugh at things that hurt, because the things that hurt are too large to carry any other way. Section 9. The Prediction Machine. Let us talk about the future. Specifically, let us talk about a claim that has become one of the most widely circulated and most genuinely strange pieces of Simpsons mythology, that the show can predict it. This is the theory that has made the show more famous in the 2020s than it was during what everyone agrees was its golden age. Not the writing, not the animation, not the characters, or the satire, or the 36 years of cultural observation. The predictions. The idea that a cartoon sitcom that started in 1989 has been accurately forecasting world events for 4 decades, slipping prophecies into episodes dressed up as jokes, hiding the future in the form of punchlines. The list of alleged predictions is long enough and specific enough to be genuinely striking the first time you encounter it. The show depicted a Donald Trump presidency 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. It showed the Disney Corporation acquiring a major film studio before the Disney-Fox merger of 2019. It depicted a smartwatch-like device years before the Apple Watch. It showed video calling, autocorrect, surveillance culture, commercial space tourism, and at least one mathematical equation that appears to describe the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was confirmed experimentally in 2012, 14 years after the episode in which the equation appeared. It depicted a pandemic originating in Asia spreading to Springfield in a 1993 episode, with panic buying and quarantine and a frantic search for a cure 27 years before COVID-19. It depicted Cypress Hill performing with a major symphony orchestra in 1996, 28 years before Cypress Hill actually performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. The list goes on. It keeps going. Every few months, a new match is found. A headline from the present lines up with a joke from 30 years ago, and the internet responds with the predictable mixture of amazement and slightly performative conspiracy theorizing. And the question gets asked again. How did they know? The show's creators have answered this question directly, and their answers are worth sitting with. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer since the show's earliest seasons, has described the prediction phenomenon as the result of throwing enough darts to eventually hit some bullseyes. The show has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes and satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that volume of content over that span of time, some of it will intersect with future events through pure statistical probability. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak seasons, put it more plainly. There are very few cases where the show predicted something. It is mainly coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. These are honest and responsible answers from people who were actually in the room when the episodes were written. They are the answers of professionals who understand that the human brain is designed to find patterns, and that the internet is designed to amplify the patterns it finds while discarding the misses. Confirmation bias, operating at scale, on a show with 800 episodes, will always produce a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. But the honest answer does not fully close the question. It closes most of it. It handles the majority of the alleged predictions in a way that is intellectually satisfying. But not all of them. Some of the coincidences are so specific that statistical probability starts to feel like insufficient language. The Trump prediction did not just forecast that a celebrity might run for president, it named Trump. The episode showed him descending an escalator in a sequence that visually mirrors the announcement Trump made in 2015. The show did not just imagine a reality television star in the Oval Office. It imagined this specific one, in this specific way. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not just joke about exotic animals being dangerous. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost exactly what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured during a live performance. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details. What do we do with those? The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been among the most educated in television. The show has employed writers with degrees from Harvard, Yale, MIT, and other institutions associated with analytical rigor. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, science, economics, and political science. These are not people making lucky guesses. They are highly intelligent observers of American culture who spend their professional lives studying trends, analyzing patterns, and imagining the logical extensions of current trajectories. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do, and then following the lines forward to where they lead. Trump had been publicly flirting with running for president since the late 1980s. A writer in 2000 examining American celebrity culture and the direction of political theater, and following those lines forward, arrives at Trump in the White House not through prophecy, but through analysis. The Disney-Fox merger was the logical conclusion of media consolidation trends that were already accelerating. The smartwatch was the obvious next step from the pager and the early personal digital assistant. Every technology gets smaller and more personal. Every media company gets larger and more acquisitive. Every celebrity eventually tries politics. The writers saw these patterns and described their ends. The hit rate looks miraculous because of the confirmation bias engine. We remember every time the show was right and forget every time it was wrong, which is the vast majority of the time. The jetpacks, the moon colonies, the political outcomes that went the other way. The cultural shifts that never materialized. These outnumber the accurate predictions by a ratio that is not even close, and none of them get screenshots or viral tweets or conspiracy theories. Only the hits survive. And the hits, collected and presented without context, look like something much stranger and more intentional than they actually are. There is, however, one more layer to this: the meta theory, the one that is more interesting than any conspiracy about time travel or secret knowledge, and that has the peculiar quality of being obviously, verifiably true in a way that the prediction conspiracy is not. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it, not through magic, through cultural influence, through the particular way that a piece of media that reaches enough people for long enough eventually becomes part of the cognitive landscape through which those people interpret new information. The Simpsons has been running for 36 years. It has been more present in American cultural life than any other single piece of entertainment for the majority of that time. Its jokes have become part of the American lexicon. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand themselves and their institutions. Its satirical framings have become the default framings through which its audience processes the things those framings describe. When the show made a joke about Trump becoming president in 2000, that joke entered the cultural bloodstream of everyone who saw it. It became a reference point. It became something people said at parties and shared as images online and thought about when they saw Trump in the news. The joke did not predict the presidency. The joke made the presidency feel familiar in advance. It primed the cultural imagination. It made the idea of a Trump presidency feel less like an outrageous impossibility and more like an inevitable punchline that had been waiting for its setup. When reality caught up to the joke, it did not feel like prediction. It felt like recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. The show's satire does not forecast the future. It normalizes the future. It takes trends that are already in motion and presents them as accomplished facts, making audiences comfortable with outcomes they might otherwise have experienced as shocks. And when those outcomes arrive, the cultural preparation creates the experience of déjà vu, which the mind retroactively classifies as prophecy because prophecy is the closest available mental category for knowing something before it happens. Springfield did not reflect America. America became Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and we stared into it so long and so steadily that we started to resemble what we saw. The corrupt billionaire, the incompetent government, the nuclear plant on the edge of town. The population too distracted by its own drama to notice how thoroughly it is being exploited. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset and collective amnesia. These were satire. And then they were us. And then we could not tell the difference. There is one more thing to say about the predictions, and it is perhaps the strangest thing. Some of the jokes that have not come true yet have a quality about them. Not a predictive quality, not a prophetic one, but a quality of specificity that makes you wonder, in a particular late-night way that is not entirely rational, but not entirely dismissible either. Whether the writers were seeing something clearly, or whether the seeing clearly was itself enough to eventually make it real. Whether the act of describing a future, in specific enough terms, to enough people with enough frequency, eventually functions as a kind of blueprint. Not because of anything supernatural. Because culture is downstream of imagination. And imagination is partly constituted by the images available to it, and the images available to American imagination for 36 years have included, among other things, 800 episodes of a very smart group of people showing you the system and all the ways it fails, and all the specific directions those failures point. Springfield is not a prediction. Springfield is a model. And models, when they are accurate, do not merely describe the thing they model, they enable it. Section 10. Springfield, Everywhere and Nowhere. This is the question the show has been dancing around for 36 years without ever committing to an answer. Not which state Springfield is in, though that question has its own rich, maddening history. The deeper question, the one that the geographic impossibility of Springfield is the surface expression of. What is Springfield? Not what kind of town, not what region. What kind of place is it, fundamentally, in the structure of the story the show is telling? What does its existence mean? The official answer is that Springfield is deliberately unlocated. Matt Groening has confirmed that he named it after Springfield, Oregon. He has said that he chose the name because it is one of the most common city names in America, present in nearly every state, as universal and unspecific as the concept of town itself. Springfield was designed to feel like home to everyone, regardless of their actual address, because it was designed to be set nowhere in particular, and therefore everywhere at once. This is true. It is also incomplete. Let me give you the geography first, the catalog of impossibilities that the show has accumulated across its run, because it is genuinely extraordinary when you list it. Springfield has oceanfront property. It has mountains. It has a desert where Homer has been stranded at least twice. It has forests dense enough to sustain bear populations and farmland open enough to see from one edge to the other. It has a harbor and a river and a gorge, and what appears to be, depending on the episode, either a Mediterranean climate or a subarctic one or something tropical. It borders Ohio. It also borders Nevada. It also borders Maine. It also borders Kentucky. These four states do not share any borders with each other, and no single state shares a border with all four of them, which means Springfield exists in a geographic space that cannot, under any cartographic logic, contain a place that borders all of them. The state abbreviation has been shown as NT, which is not the abbreviation of any American state. The zip code has been shown with a leading 6, which would place it in Missouri or a neighboring state, but the geography is inconsistent with Missouri. The state capital, when characters have called it, has been identified as being in a state starting with a vowel, which narrows the field but does not close it. The show has given you every clue, and none of the clues agree. Matt Groening revealed in 2012 that Springfield was based on his childhood proximity to Springfield, Oregon, and for roughly 48 hours the mystery appeared to be solved. Then the show aired an episode that placed Springfield in a geographic context inconsistent with Oregon, and the writers continued inserting contradictions as if the revelation had not happened, and the mystery continued. Springfield will not be located, not because no one has figured it out, because the town does not want to be found. There is a practical reason for this that has nothing to do with storytelling artistry. A town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority. Think about what that means for a facility like the Springfield nuclear power plant. If Springfield is in Ohio, Ohio's environmental regulators have jurisdiction. If it is in Nevada, Nevada does. If it shifts between states depending on the episode, no single state can maintain continuous jurisdiction. No single EPA regional office has clear authority. No single state attorney general can initiate an ongoing investigation. The regulatory landscape shifts every time the geographic landscape shifts, and the result is a facility with 342 violations that has been operating for decades without the sustained governmental attention that its violation count would normally guarantee. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone drives up in a federal vehicle with a clipboard and a mandate and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who appears to be sustained by his own radiation exposure and the population whose collective cognitive function is suspiciously compromised. The geographic uncertainty is not just a comedy device, it is a legal shield, built into the very structure of the town by the same forces that benefit from the ambiguity. The theories offer their own readings of the geography, each of them internally consistent and each of them adding a layer to what the impossibility means. The radiation theory suggests that the contamination does not just affect biology. If the nuclear exposure from the plant has been significant enough to alter the cellular structure of every living organism in Springfield, human and animal and fish alike, why should the physical landscape be exempt? Perhaps the radiation has warped the space around Springfield, the way heavy mass warps space-time, compressing geographies that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single region. Mountains and oceans and deserts and farmland, all within driving distance of the same nuclear facility, drawn together by the same gravitational force that has drawn every other consequence of the plant's operation toward its source. The coma theory offers the simplest and most elegant geographic explanation. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise mental map of America. It has impressions, fragments, the memory of every place Homer has ever seen or visited or watched on television, layered on top of each other without regard for spatial logic, because dreams do not have spatial logic. Dreams have emotional logic. They arrange the world according to feeling rather than geography. Homer remembers mountains from somewhere. He remembers a coast from somewhere else. He remembers a desert and farmland and forests and rivers, all from different places and different times. And in the dream, they are all here. They are all Springfield. The town is assembled from his accumulated emotional geography, all the places he has ever been that felt like something, pressed together into a single space that contains all of them without belonging to any of them precisely. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America. And Homer's memory is scattered and beautiful and held together by longing rather than by any map that actually exists. There is an episode called Behind the Laughter from the show's 12th season, formatted as a mockumentary about the Simpsons family, in which Springfield's location is finally and explicitly revealed. In the original broadcast, Springfield is identified as being in northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, that identification was changed to a different state entirely. The answer depends on which version of the episode you are watching. Even when the show gave you the truth, it made the truth contingent, platform-dependent, mutable. The answer is in the episode, but which episode you have access to determines which answer you get. And both answers are official, and both answers contradict the other. And Springfield remains, as it has always been, impossible to pin. The show gave you the truth and changed the truth at the same time, just like it always does. I want to spend a moment with what Springfield looks like from the outside because we have been inside it for so long tonight that it might be useful to step back and look at the shape of the whole thing from a different angle. Springfield is a small American city with a nuclear power plant, a functioning but chaotic municipal government, a school system under perpetual strain, a population of roughly 10,000 people, and a set of institutions, a hospital, a church, a police department, a courthouse, a prison, that perform their basic functions with varying degrees of competence. From the outside, it looks like any mid-sized American city you might drive through on the highway without stopping. A familiar skyline, familiar problems. The cooling tower's a little ominous, but visible from far enough away to be abstract. From the inside, it is one of the most comprehensively strange places that has ever been imagined. And the strangest thing about it, the thing that makes it stranger than the three-eyed fish, or the immortal billionaire, or the dreaming safety inspector, or the genius baby, is that nobody inside it has ever found it strange. The residents of Springfield go about their lives with the full, comfortable conviction that their town is ordinary, that their yellow skin is normal, that their four fingers are nothing worth mentioning, that the billionaire who runs the power plant and has been alive since before their grandparents were born is just the way things are. The strangeness is invisible from inside. That is what makes it Springfield. That is what makes it everywhere. That is what makes it quietly every town that has ever normalized something that should not be normal, that has ever voted to sustain a comfortable lie, that has ever looked at the three-eyed fish and thought, well, that is just how things are around here, and turned back to whatever it was doing before. Springfield is everywhere because the mechanism it runs on, the organized, collective, perfectly maintained refusal to look directly at the thing that is most obviously wrong, is not unique to Springfield. Springfield is everywhere because we are all, to some extent, drinking the same water. Section 11. The Loop We Built. We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. We have walked through the radiation and the coma and the mystery of who pulled the trigger and the mathematics of an immortal man's survival. We have watched the town vote to exile the truth. We have followed Mona Simpson's trail from a suburban kitchen in 1969 to a fugitive's life, to a bedside reunion that came too late and ended too soon. We have watched Maggie watching from behind the pacifier, watching everything, saying nothing. We have counted the predictions and understood the mechanism of how they work, and asked what it means that the mechanism occasionally produces something that feels like more than mechanism. We have searched for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. And now we arrive at the final paradox, the one that all the others have been pointing toward. The one that sits at the center of the show's 36-year existence like a gravitational mass, organizing everything around it without ever being named directly. The floating timeline, and what it actually means. Bart Simpson was 10 years old in December 1989. He is 10 years old tonight. This fact is, when you sit with it without the cushion of cartoon convention, one of the most profoundly strange things in the history of storytelling. Not because it is unique. Long-running animated shows have always worked this way, but because of how long it has gone on. Because of what 36 years of frozen time actually adds up to. A child who has been 10 years old for 36 years has not had a childhood. He has had a single moment of childhood, infinitely extended, looping back on itself at the end of every 22 minutes, resetting to the same skateboard and the same slingshot and the same desk in the same classroom with the same teacher and the same half-completed homework. He has had experiences. He has had adventures, misadventures, lessons learned and immediately unlearned, emotional growth that dissolves before the next episode, relationships that deepen and then return to their default settings, friendships and rivalries, and moments of genuine connection that vanish without trace. He has traveled to dozens of countries, met famous people, survived threats that would age an adult by decades. And he is still 10. The experiences do not accumulate. They occur, and then they are absorbed and neutralized by the floating timeline, digested by the mechanism that keeps Springfield still, converted from the material of growth into the material of entertainment, always generating heat, never producing light. Every theory we have discussed converges on this point. Every single one of them, regardless of their other differences and disagreements, arrives at the same conclusion about time. Time is broken in Springfield. The radiation theory says that chronic nuclear exposure has altered the biology of the town's residents at the cellular level, interfering with the normal aging process in the same way that radiation exposure is known to interfere with normal cellular replication. If the contamination has been severe enough and long-lasting enough, the cells of Springfield's residents may simply no longer be capable of the normal senescent processes that constitute aging in human biology. They do not grow older because the machinery of growing older has been disrupted. The coma theory says that time is frozen because the dreaming mind that generates Springfield has no information about what happens after April 1993, and can therefore only cycle through the information it already had at that point. The children do not age because Homer cannot imagine them aging. He was not there for the aging. His brain is working from a snapshot, a frozen image of the world at the moment the vending machine fell, and no amount of dream elaboration can add to what the snapshot already contains. The principle in the pauper theory says that Springfield collectively chooses to freeze time through the same social mechanism that voted to exile the real Seymour Skinner. The town has made an implicit, ongoing decision to maintain the fiction that nothing changes, because change would mean acknowledging the passage of time, and acknowledging the passage of time would mean acknowledging everything that the passage of time has done to the town, the contamination and the damage and the accumulated weight of what has been taken and what has been lost. Burns's immortality theory says that at least one resident has found a way to make time negotiable through sufficient wealth and technological investment, which means that the concept of time as an inexorable force affecting everyone equally has never been fully operative in Springfield. In a town where the most powerful person is exempt from time's basic conditions, The town's relationship with time was always already strange. And the prediction theory says that Springfield exists in a feedback loop with reality, in which the distinction between the fictional present and the actual present has been progressively collapsing, such that the show and the culture it describes have become so entangled that the normal relationship between a story and the world it depicts, the relationship in which the story is downstream of the world, has been reversed, and Springfield now acts as a shaping force on the reality it once merely reflected. All five theories say the same thing in different languages. Time stopped in Springfield. The show has imagined its characters growing up. It has done this multiple times in flash-forward episodes, speculative futures, what-if scenarios that open the door to time and then gently close it again. In a Season 6 episode called Lisa's Wedding, the show moves forward to a future in which Lisa is 23 years old, engaged to an English graduate student, about to begin the adult life that her intelligence and determination and relentless hope for the world have been pointing toward for her entire childhood. The episode is beautiful. It is one of the most emotionally accomplished things the show has ever done, and what makes it accomplish what it does is precisely the thing it cannot sustain. Lisa has grown up. She is a person with a past and a perspective and the particular kind of hard-won self-knowledge that only comes from having been young and made mistakes and learned from them. She is recognizably the girl we have known, but she is also someone new, someone who could only exist at the end of a process of growth that the show does not normally allow. And then the episode ends. Lisa returns to being 8. The future closes. The floating timeline resumes. The glimpse is sealed off. The show proved in that episode that it can imagine its characters as adults. It can envision their futures with specificity and emotional richness. It can tell those stories beautifully when it chooses to. It chooses not to. The flash forward is a single episode, a window opened and closed, a gesture toward the road not taken. And the road not taken is not taken because the writers could not see it. It is not taken because the road leads somewhere the show cannot go. The road leads to goodbye. Here is the thing about the floating timeline that I want you to hold for a moment before we let it settle. The Simpsons is not just a show. It has not been just a show since roughly the early 1990s. It crossed some threshold during its golden era, some point of cultural saturation, and became something that functions more like an institution or a landmark than like a television program. It is the American family, not a version of it, the version, the one that everyone knows, that everyone has a relationship with, that has been present in the cultural background for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. And what this means is that the floating timeline is not just a narrative device employed by a television show to maintain its format. The floating timeline is a covenant, a promise that the show makes to its audience, renewed every Sunday night for 36 years, that the family will be there, that they will be the same, that Homer will come through the door at 5:30 and Marge will be in the kitchen, and Bart will be causing trouble and Lisa will be playing saxophone and Maggie will be in her crib, and Evergreen Terrace will be on the map, wherever the map says it is this week, and the cooling towers will be breathing on the horizon, and the couch will have the family on it, and the credits will roll, and everything will be fine. The promise is impossible to keep, and the show has been keeping it for 36 years. Because we need it kept. That is the truth at the center of all the other truths. We need the Simpsons to stay frozen because letting them grow up means admitting that time has passed. And admitting that time has passed means admitting that we have passed with it. That we are older than we were when we first sat in front of the television and watched this family for the first time. That the couch we sat on then is somewhere we no longer have access to, in a house or an apartment, or a childhood bedroom that belongs to someone else now or to no one. The Simpsons do not age because aging means ending. And the American family, as The Simpsons embodies it, is not allowed to end. Not in fiction, not in the shared imagination of everyone who has ever found something of their own lives, in the lives of these impossible, yellow, four-fingered, radiation-soaked, possibly dreamed, perpetually present Mayan people. The loop is not their prison. The loop is ours. We built it. We maintain it. We tune in every week to make sure it is still running, and every time we do, we make it a little more permanent. Think about what it would actually mean for the show to let time pass. Think about Bart at 16, Then at 18, driving away from Springfield toward whatever college will take him, in whatever direction the floating geography currently places higher education. Think about Lisa at 14, at 17, at the age she is in the Flash Forward episode, old enough to understand her own brilliance as both gift and burden, old enough to have learned things about the world that the 8-year-old version of her still has the luxury of not knowing. Think about Maggie beginning to speak, really speak, sentences, thoughts. The accumulated observations of 36 years of watching from behind the pacifier, finally given language, finally allowed out into the world. Think about Homer and Marge in their 50s, in their 60s, the particular negotiations of a long marriage. In the years when the children are gone and the house is quiet and the question of who you are to each other. After all of that is no longer answerable by the structure of parenting or the demands of raising young children. Think about what that Springfield would look like. Think about whether you would want to watch it. And then think about whether your answer to that question tells you something. We do not want to watch it. Not because it would not be good. It might be extraordinary. But because watching it would mean accepting what it asks us to accept, which is that the version of The Simpsons we have always known, the version where Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8, and the house on Evergreen Terrace always looks the same, was always temporary, was always time-limited, was always going to end, even if the ending was gradual, even if it came in the form of growth rather than cancellation. We do not want to accept that, because accepting it is accepting something about our own lives. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them frozen. Because they are us. Because Springfield is everywhere. Because Homer is every father who has ever failed in exactly the right ways. And Marge is every person who has ever held something together through sheer unacknowledged force of will. And Bart is who we wanted to be when we were 10, and Lisa is who we meant to become. And Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep hidden, watching everything, waiting for the moment to speak. We pressed pause in 1989, and we have never pressed play. And here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family on the same street in the same impossible town. The cooling towers breathing on the horizon, the tire fire burning on the hill, the yellow families asleep in their houses, the old man awake in his, running his maintenance schedule, keeping the machine running, keeping the lights on. And in the middle of all of it, on a couch in front of a television on Evergreen Terrace, a family. Still there. Always still there. The paradoxes of Springfield are not problems waiting to be solved. They are the show's deepest content. They are what the show is actually about, underneath the jokes and the satire and the cultural commentary and the couch gags. They are the show's honest accounting of what happens when something runs long enough to outlive its own moment and become something else entirely. Something more permanent, something more strange, something that has accumulated so much history and so many contradictions and so many unanswered questions that it no longer resembles the object it started as and has become instead a kind of landscape. The landscape of Springfield, which is everywhere, which is nowhere, which is the town you grew up in, regardless of where you grew up, which has a power plant on its edge and a fire burning on its hill and a family on its couch. Waiting. Always waiting, not for anything in particular, just waiting, the way everything in Springfield waits, with the infinite patience of things that have been asked not to change and have honored the request for 36 years and will honor it for as long as anyone needs them to. Take a breath. A long, slow one. You have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. You have walked its streets and looked at its cooling towers and sat in the waiting room of the hospital where Homer may or may not be dreaming, and stood at the edge of the river where the three-eyed fish still swims, and past the house where the real Seymour Skinner is not allowed to live, and watched the old man in his mansion count down the days until his next treatment. You have done all of this, and you are still here, which means Springfield let you leave. Not everyone gets to. The best thing about the paradoxes of Springfield is not that they are mysteries. It is that they are mirrors. Every impossible thing about Springfield, the frozen time, the contaminated water, the immortal employer, the unasked questions, the collective amnesia, the voted-in lies, the genius hidden behind a baby's face, the mother erased by a powerful man's grudge, the son who cannot see the architecture of his own suffering. Because the architecture is too familiar to look like architecture, Every single one of these things has a version that exists outside the show, not in cartoons, in the world. Towns that have normalized the factory on the edge of their water supply. Families whose histories have been rewritten to accommodate the version of events that the powerful find comfortable. Systems designed to produce particular kinds of people with particular kinds of compliance. Old men who have accumulated enough infrastructure to live by rules that do not apply to anyone else. Communities that have voted to keep lies and exile truth and make silence the price of belonging. The Simpsons has been a comedy for 36 years. It has also been a report. The writers were watching. They were watching carefully with the analytical precision of people trained to read patterns and follow them to their conclusions. And they wrote down what they saw in the form of jokes, because jokes travel further than accusations and land softer and stay in the mind longer, because the laughter lowers the guard just enough for the actual content to get through. The three-eyed fish is funny. The three-eyed fish is also real. Not in Springfield. In the places Springfield was built from. The actual rivers downstream of actual facilities. The actual communities whose water the actual powerful have been treating as a byproduct disposal system for actual decades. The fish have different numbers of eyes in different places, but the principle is the same. And the willingness to look at the fish and ask the obvious question, and then look at the people drinking the water, is the same willingness that Springfield has spent 36 years demonstrating it does not have. That is not just Springfield. That is a great deal of the actual world. And the show has known this from the beginning, has been saying it from the beginning, in the form of jokes, in the form of yellow families on a couch, in the form of a town that cannot age because if it aged, it would have to face the weight of everything it has accumulated. We are almost done now. Almost at the end of the journey through Springfield, through the paradoxes and the theories and the unanswered questions and the answered but not resolved ones. Almost ready to let it all settle. Before it does, I want to say one thing that is not a theory, not a reading or an interpretation or a frame. Just a simple observation about what has kept this show on the air for 36 years, what has kept people returning to Springfield week after week and year after year, what has made it the longest-running animated series in American history and the most analyzed piece of television ever made. The show is about love. All of the paradoxes, all of the contradictions, all of the buried mysteries and unresolved questions, they are all expressions of what happens when love has to survive in conditions that are not designed for it. The contamination and the corruption and the institutional weight and the things that get taken and the things that get broken and the endless resetting loop that prevents anything from being permanently healed. All of it is the environment in which love has to operate. And love, in the form of this family, keeps operating anyway. Homer's love for his family is real. The show never lets you doubt this, not even in its most absurdist moments. Not even when Homer is at his most incompetent and his most selfish and his most egregiously himself. The love is there, constant, structural, the thing the family is built on even when everything built on it is wobbling. Marge's love is its own kind of extraordinary, the patient, steady, tireless love of someone who has decided that this family is worth the work and has been doing the work for 36 years without asking for the recognition it deserves. And even Homer's dream, if the coma theory is right, the long, unbroken dream of a man who went under in April 1993 and has not come back, even that is an expression of love. The dream runs because love runs it. The loop keeps going because what love wants, what it wants most fundamentally and most desperately, is exactly what Homer's dream provides. Everyone still there, everyone still young. No goodbyes yet, no endings yet. Just the family. On the couch, in the house, in the town, in the loop. Together. Let your eyes be fully closed now if they want to be. Let the weight of your body be completely supported by whatever is beneath you. Let your breathing do what it wants, slow and easy and without effort. Springfield is there in the soft dark behind your eyes. The cooling towers on the horizon, the tire fire on the hill, the river with its three-eyed passengers moving in the dark current. The houses on Evergreen Terrace with their lights off and their families asleep. And in one of those houses, maybe the one with the peculiar car and the dog that runs too fast and the mailbox that is always slightly crooked, a family. Homer is on the couch or in the bed or somewhere between the two, dreaming, or actually present, or some combination of both that Springfield does not bother to distinguish between. Marge is upstairs, her impossible hair spread across the pillow, patient even in sleep, holding something together just by being there. Bart is in his room with the skateboard and the slingshot and the homework that will never be done. 10 years old and permanently 10 years old. All that possibility still intact, still undirected, still available to become anything the floating timeline will permit. Lisa is reading with the light on. Always reading, always with the light on, 8 years old and aware of too much. Playing her saxophone in the imagination because the hour is too late for actual music. Writing in her journal about what she has understood today and what she still cannot figure out, and what she is going to try tomorrow. And Maggie. Maggie is in her crib, enormous eyes closed, pacifier still, watching even in sleep, behind those eyes, the way Maggie watches everything. Watching Springfield, watching you, planning something, something brilliant and patient and 36 years in the making. Something nobody will see coming. Something that, when it finally arrives, will be so quietly perfect that you will wonder how you ever missed the signs. You were watching the whole time, but you were watching the wrong things. That is okay. So was Springfield. Good night, wherever you are, however you got here, however long you have been watching. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point. If you made it this far, drop a comment with your time and location. There is something beautiful about knowing where in the world people are falling asleep to Springfield tonight. And if this is the kind of slow, deep storytelling you want more of, subscribe. There are more mysteries where these came from, and they are all waiting in the dark. End of script expanded sections. Additional material expanded. The town that time forgot. Continued. There is a specific texture to Springfield that rewards very slow attention. Not the jokes, the spaces between the jokes. The moments when the show's relentless forward momentum pauses for a beat longer than it needs to. When a background detail sits in frame just long enough to register before the scene cuts away. These pauses are not accidents. The show's writers and directors have always been too skilled, too deliberate, too in command of their medium for the pauses to be accidental. They are invitations. The Springfield nuclear power plant's cooling towers in the background of a shot that is ostensibly about a school fundraiser. The tire fire visible from the elementary school playground, burning with a cheerful persistency that the children have long since stopped noticing. The way Homer drives to work every morning past the same cracked parking lot, the same chain-link fence, the same guard booth, and the show holds on this commute for exactly one beat longer than the joke requires. Just long enough for the image to settle, for the repetition to become something that feels less like character detail and more like documentation. The show has always been documenting something. The question is what? One reading, the comfortable reading, the reading that most people who think about the show arrive at first and stay with, because it is broadly correct, is that the show is documenting American suburban life in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The anxieties of the middle class, the gap between aspiration and reality, the way institutions fail the people they are supposed to serve, the particular frustrations and small joys of a life organized around work and family, and not quite enough money and too much television and the occasional donut that is, in that moment, the best thing in the world. This reading is correct. It is what the show is. It is what Matt Groening intended, and what the writers have executed with brilliant consistency across 3.5 decades. But there is a second layer beneath it. Because the show has been running long enough, it has accumulated a second kind of documentation almost by accident. The documentation that happens when you point a camera at a place and leave it running long enough. Not the documentation of intention, of things the makers wanted to capture, but the documentation of time. Of what a place looks like when you return to it every week for 36 years and find it always the same. The show is documenting stillness. It is documenting, in exquisite and accumulated detail, what a world that refuses to change looks like from the inside. What it feels like to be one of the people who live in it. What it costs to maintain the fiction that the stillness is natural rather than engineered, that the sameness is a feature rather than a symptom, that the loop is comfortable rather than inescapable. Springfield is not just a place where the jokes happen. Springfield is a case study, and the case being studied is the one that matters most. The one that every other theory and every other paradox and every other unanswered question is ultimately a variation on. What does it cost to be comfortable? What do you give up? What do you stop being able to see? The show debuted in December 1989 in the specific cultural moment of the late Cold War's ending. The Berlin Wall fell on November 9th of that year, 5 weeks before The Simpsons premiere. The decade that followed, the 1990s, was characterized by a particular kind of American confidence, a belief that history had arrived at its endpoint, that the major questions had been settled, that what remained was the management of prosperity. The future was not going to be dramatically different from the present. It was going to be more of the same, but better equipped and more efficiently organized. The Simpsons was, in this context, a satire of that confidence. It looked at the comfortable certainty of suburban American life and found, within its detailed examination of that life, the cracks and contradictions and unexamined assumptions that the broader culture was choosing not to look at. It was funny because it was accurate. The accuracy was funny because it was recognizable. The recognition was uncomfortable because what was being recognized was something that everyone knew, but nobody had quite articulated in this particular way before. But here is what happened. The satire ran long enough to outlive the thing it was satirizing. The late Cold War certainty dissolved. The 1990s comfortable confidence gave way to the more anxious, more fragmented, more contested cultural landscape of the decades that followed. The United States changed in ways that would have seemed, in December 1989, almost unimaginable. And through all of it, The Simpsons stayed the same. The satire of the comfortable American certainty of 1989 is still running in 2025. But 2025's America is not 1989's America. And the family in the house on Evergreen Terrace is still the family that was designed to satirize a world that no longer quite exists in the form it once did. What this creates is something that was never in the original design. The Simpsons has become, unintentionally, a document of stability in the specific sense of showing you what remained the same while everything else changed. The family is frozen, the town is frozen, the cooling towers are still breathing. And around them, in the world outside the frame, everything has shifted. The technology, the politics, the cultural landscape, the specific anxieties and aspirations that define the moment, all of it has moved while Springfield stood still. And that stillness, which started as a production convention and became a satirical choice and then became a cultural institution, has ended up being something stranger still. It has become a record, an archive, a 36-year document of what America looked like before it became what it currently is, preserved in amber, available for consultation at any time, carrying within it the particular quality that all truly old things carry. The weight of time. Not the time that passes inside Springfield, because time does not pass inside Springfield. The time that passes outside it. The time that you carry into every episode you watch. The accumulated years of your own life since you first encountered the show. Whatever age you were and whatever year it was and wherever you were sitting. That time is real. That time has moved. And every time you return to Springfield and find it exactly as you left it, the gap between the Springfield that does not change and the you that does widens by exactly the amount you have grown. The show cannot age, you can. And the gap between you is the truest measure of how long you have been watching. Let me tell you about one more quality of Springfield's frozen time that the show acknowledges obliquely in a handful of episodes and then retreats from, because the acknowledgement, if sustained, would unravel everything. There are moments, rare ones, when a character in Springfield approaches the edge of the loop, when they come close enough to the mechanism of the stasis to almost see it, when the question that should be asked by everyone all the time gets almost asked. Lisa comes closest, most often, because Lisa is the show's designated asker of difficult questions, the character whose role in the family and in the narrative is to notice what everyone else is not noticing and to say what everyone else is not saying. Lisa has come within a sentence of asking the question directly. In episodes about Springfield's environmental problems, about its political corruption, about the systematic ways in which the town fails its residents, Lisa has approached the threshold where the local question becomes the global one, where the problem with this specific thing connects to the problem with everything. And she always stops just short. Not because the writers are being cowardly or evasive, because stopping just short is the most honest, available representation of what it is actually like to live inside a system that is too large and too entrenched to be changed by the awareness of any single person within it. Lisa sees more clearly than anyone in Springfield. And seeing clearly in Springfield is an experience that the show has documented as one of the loneliest experiences available to a resident of the town. Lisa sees the problem. She cannot fix it. She keeps seeing it anyway. Because the alternative, the Homer alternative, the choice to unsee it, to put the figurative crayon back, to choose the fog over the clarity, is not available to Lisa. She is not built for the fog. She is built for the light, even when the light hurts. And so she carries the weight of seeing in a place that does not reward seeing and does not punish not seeing. And she stays 8 years old forever. And the saxophone plays on Sunday nights, and the cooling towers breathe on the horizon, and nothing changes, and everything stays exactly as it is. That is Springfield. That is the loop. That is what we keep paying to visit. The comfort of Springfield is real. Do not let anything I have said tonight suggest otherwise. There is genuine, honest, non-ironic comfort in the show. The kind of comfort that comes from knowing that something will be there when you return to it. The kind that comes from familiarity, not as stagnation, but as continuity. The kind that comes from a family that, whatever else you can say about it, keeps showing up, keeps trying, keeps being recognizably itself through every catastrophe and absurdity and impossible event. Homer keeps going to work. He keeps coming home. He keeps loving his family in the imperfect, inconsistent, deeply felt way that he loves them, and the love is real even when the expression of it is a disaster. Marge keeps cooking the dinner and managing the crisis and believing in the version of Homer that he is on his best days, the version that only intermittently appears but that she has decided to organize her hope around. 36 years of organizing her hope around the best version of an imperfect man. That is not nothing. That is not cynical or sad or something to be analyzed away. That is a choice, and it is a choice the show honors. Bart keeps being Bart, which is to say he keeps being the specific kind of child who is too alive for the containers placed around him and too loving for the armor he has built to fully conceal that love. His tenderness surfaces sideways, in moments of unguarded connection with Homer or Lisa, or in the rare episode where the show allows him to be simply and completely himself without the protective layer of mischief. Lisa keeps hoping. That, more than anything, is what makes her the show's moral center. Not her intelligence, not her principles, not her saxophone, or her vegetarianism, or her activism, her hope. The specific, stubborn, repeatedly tested, and never finally extinguished hope that the world is capable of being better than it currently is, and that working toward that better world is worth the effort and the disappointment and the isolation. And Maggie. Maggie keeps watching, and that watching is, in its own way, a form of love too. The most patient form. The form that trusts the people it watches enough to give them the full span of time they need before asking anything of them. All of this is inside the loop. All of this is what the loop contains. The paradoxes and the theories and the unanswered questions and the dark readings are also inside the loop. But they share the space with this, with the love and the comfort and the weekly return and the family always there on the couch. The show holds both things simultaneously without resolving them into each other. The darkness and the warmth, the contamination and the love, the frozen time and the genuine feeling, the institutional conspiracy and the domestic tenderness, all of it present at once, all of it true at once, the way real life tends to be when you look at it honestly enough. That is why we cannot let them go. Not because we are not paying attention, because we are. Expanded. The Nuclear Heart. The full catalog. Let me take you through the contamination more carefully, because the details accumulate in a way that individual episodes cannot quite convey. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been operational for the entirety of the show's run, and within that run, the show has given us a catalog of its malfunctions and violations and incidents that, if compiled into a single document and presented to an actual regulatory body, would result in the facility's immediate shutdown and the criminal prosecution of its owner. Here is some of what we know. Radioactive waste has been disposed of by dropping glowing barrels into the local water supply. Not an accident, not a spill, a disposal method. The waste was transported to the body of water and placed there intentionally, as a solution to the logistical problem of where to put material that cannot simply be thrown away. Radioactive rods, which the show uses as shorthand for the plant's fuel assemblies, have been found in Springfield's environment in contexts that suggest they were not contained to the facility. Homer has transported them in his clothing. One was used as a back scratcher. The casual relationship between Springfield's residents and nuclear material that should be stored in specialized containment vessels under multiple layers of physical security is one of the show's longest-running background gags, and it is a gag that, if you think about it for more than a moment, is not actually funny at all. The plant's record on worker safety is, by any reasonable standard, catastrophic. Employees have been exposed to radiation in amounts and frequencies that the show treats as routine occupational hazard, the kind of thing you grumble about on the way home from work rather than report to a federal agency. The workers of the plant move through environments that should require hazmat suits, wearing standard clothing and no apparent concern. The security apparatus of the plant has failed repeatedly in ways that have allowed both the general public and Homer's specific family members to access areas that should be secured. Children have been inside the facility. Animals have been inside the facility. Homer has dropped food into the reactor core on multiple occasions, and this has never, in the course of the show's timeline, resulted in a regulatory review. And then there is the dumping ground. There is an area near the plant that serves as an informal repository for waste and materials that the facility's official processes do not know what to do with. This area is not delineated, not fenced, not signed, not in any way marked as hazardous despite the obvious hazard of its contents. It is simply there, on the edge of Springfield, a landscape of accumulated industrial consequence that the town has normalized into invisibility the way it has normalized everything else. The animals in and around this area have been visibly affected. The flora has been affected. The soil composition of this area is, within the show's own visual logic, clearly not what it should be. And nobody tests it. And nobody asks, and the cooling towers keep breathing. Now let us talk about what chronic, low-level radiation exposure actually does to a human brain. Because this is the mechanism by which the nuclear theory connects to the cognitive impairment theory, and the connection is important. Radiation, at sufficient doses over sufficient time, is known to produce neurological effects that include impaired memory function, reduced cognitive processing speed, difficulty with complex reasoning, and a specific type of damage to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, long-term planning, and the ability to recognize patterns across time and act on that recognition. In a population exposed to chronic, low-level radiation from a nearby facility over decades, the effect on prefrontal function would produce a community that is not dramatically impaired in any single capacity, but that demonstrates a consistent, subtle deficit in exactly the cognitive operations that would be required to recognize and resist the source of the contamination. They would be able to function. They would be able to work and raise children and have conversations and form opinions. They would not be obviously dramatically impaired in the ways that acute radiation exposure produces. They would be impaired in the precise way that makes it hardest to notice. Impaired in the ability to look at a set of facts distributed across time and connect them into a pattern. Impaired in the ability to sustain the kind of long-term, consequential, abstract reasoning that would be required to go from the three-eyed fish to the plant, to Burns to the question of why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers. The contamination would not make Springfield's residents dumb in any crude sense. It would make them unable to connect the dots, which is the specific cognitive deficit that Springfield exhibits consistently across every season and every episode. They see the fish. They do not connect the fish to the plant. They see the plant. They do not connect the plant to their own bodies. They see their own bodies. They do not find them unusual. The chain of inference that would lead from any of these observations to a conclusion is precisely the chain that the contamination has compromised. The poison is not just in the water. The poison is in the process of thought. Burns understands this. The show never makes this explicit in a single declarative scene. It distributes the evidence across episodes in a way that requires exactly the kind of inferential chaining that the contamination has compromised in Springfield's residents, which is either a very sophisticated formal joke or a very sophisticated piece of narrative structure that functions differently for audiences inside and outside the town. Burns funds research into the effects of radiation on biological systems. Not publicly, not through philanthropic channels, not in ways that would be visible to the community or regulatory bodies, but privately, through the pharmaceutical division of his corporate empire. He has private physicians whose specialty is a form of medicine that does not exist in standard practice, the management of bodies that have been exposed to radiation for longer and at higher levels than standard medicine is designed to handle. Burns is the only person in Springfield who fully understands the mechanism, because he is the only one whose survival depends on understanding it. And his understanding has led him to a conclusion that shapes every decision he makes about the plant, about his employees, about his relationship to the community he has been poisoning. The conclusion is this: the contamination is not an unfortunate side effect of the plant's operation. The contamination is the plant's most important product. The electricity is the business. The contamination is the control. A population that cannot connect the dots is a population that will not organize against the source of its own impairment. A population that cannot sustain the inferential chain from symptom to cause to perpetrator is a population that will continue to elect Burns to whatever informal civic position he cares to occupy, continue to employ his plant's workers without questioning the safety violations that put those workers at risk, continue to drink the water and breathe the air and produce yellow children with 4 fingers who will grow up to take jobs at the plant and continue the cycle. The contamination is not an accident. It is a management strategy. Whether Burns ever stated this explicitly to anyone, whether there is a memo or a board meeting or a private admission that frames it in these terms, the show does not say, but the effect is identical to the effect it would have if it were intentional. And in Springfield, the distinction between an effect that is produced by accident and an effect that is produced by design has always been less important than the question of who benefits from the effect existing. Burns benefits. Burns has always benefited. The cooling towers keep breathing. Expanded. Homer's endless sleep. The evidence. The coma theory, if you wanted to be comprehensive about it, could fill a document much longer than this one. The evidence that the show has accumulated, both in the changes that occurred after the coma episode and in the specific details of how those changes manifest, is extensive enough that engaging with it seriously requires time. Let me give you some of that time. Before the coma episode, the show had a specific relationship to its own continuity. Events that happened in one episode were acknowledged in subsequent episodes. Characters developed in ways that accumulated. Homer's relationship with his own limitations was more grounded, more painful in an honest rather than a comedic way. The show's world had edges, places where it stopped being willing to go because going there would require the kind of narrative consequence that the premise could not support. After the coma episode, the edges dissolve. There are no longer things that are too extreme for the show's world because the show's world has been replaced by a world that operates by different rules. Dream rules. The rules of a space in which the normal constraints of causality and consequence are suspended, in which anything can happen and nothing has to make coherent sense in the way that a waking narrative has to make coherent sense, in which the impossibility of an event is not a reason it cannot occur, but simply a quality it has. Homer. Going to space is not, within the logic of a dream, more or less possible than Homer getting into an argument with Ned Flanders about the property line. Both are events. Both occur. The dream does not have a plausibility scale, it just has a field in which events happen, and some of those events are closer to the center of the field and some are further from it, but all of them are inside it. After April 1993, everything is inside the field. The celebrity flood is worth examining in more detail. The early seasons of the show are not celebrity-free. Guest appearances happen, but they tend to be guest appearances in the traditional sense, where a notable person shows up in a context that makes narrative sense, plays something close to themselves, and interacts with the Simpsons in a way that is motivated by the episode's plot. After the coma, the celebrity appearances become something qualitatively different. They become frequent to the point of saturation. They become disconnected from narrative necessity in ways that earlier appearances were not. Famous people show up in Springfield because famous people show up in Springfield, in a way that requires no more explanation than any other dream element requires. And this is exactly what the theory predicts. Homer's brain, lying in the hospital, receiving ambient input from the television and the radio and the conversations happening in and around his room, is processing cultural information without context. Names, faces, fragments of music, the sound of a voice on a commercial. These arrive without the organizing framework that conscious experience provides. And the dreaming brain does what the dreaming brain does, which is to incorporate them into the running narrative, to make them characters, to give them bodies and voices and scenes to play in. The celebrity is the sound made flesh. The famous face is a name that filtered through. Every guest appearance in later seasons is a piece of the outside world that made it into the dream, stripped of its original context and rewired to fit the Springfield that Homer's brain is maintaining for him. This is why the later celebrity appearances feel different from the earlier ones. Not because the writing is lazier, though sometimes it is, but because they are operating by different logic. The logic of the dream, where presence does not require justification and connection, does not require causality. There is one more piece of evidence that I want to lay out carefully, because it is the piece that is hardest to dismiss, and that the official denials have never adequately addressed. The tonal shift after the coma is not random. It is directional. Each successive season of the show after the coma is slightly more extreme than the one before it. The plots are slightly more impossible. The character behavior is slightly more detached from realistic human motivation. The physical comedy is slightly more willing to treat Homer's body as a cartoon object subject to cartoon physics, rather than a human body subject to human consequences. The world around The Simpsons is slightly more willing to accommodate whatever the episode needs from it, regardless of whether that accommodation makes sense given what the world was established to be. The escalation is gradual enough that any single season transition does not feel dramatic, but measured from the 4th season to the 10th, or from the 10th to the 20th, or from the 20th to the 36th, the distance is not gradual. It is enormous. The show is getting less real over time. Not in a way that suggests the writers losing interest, or the network forcing changes, or the natural entropy of a long-running series wearing through its best material. In a way that suggests a brain slowly, progressively losing its grip on the simulation. A dream engine that started with relatively coherent rules and has been running for so long, degrading so gradually, that the coherence has dissolved into something that can still produce events and images and characters, but can no longer maintain the internal consistency that made the early seasons feel like they were about something true. The dream is getting away from itself, because the dreamer is getting further from consciousness. Because the brain that generates it has been generating it for 36 years and is running down. And the simulation runs on, generating images and stories, growing stranger with each cycle, each season a little further from the moment the vending machine fell, each episode a little more elaborately disconnected from the world outside the hospital window, until the machine finally stops, if it ever does. Expanded. The Burns equation. Historical dimensions. The history of the Burns family, scattered across episodes in fragments that the show never fully assembles, is one of the most extraordinary pieces of world building in the history of television, and it has never been given the sustained analytical attention it deserves. Here is what we can reconstruct. The Burns family has been wealthy since before the United States existed in its current form. The fortune predates the Industrial Revolution and extends back through generations of Burnses who exercise the kind of power over the communities around them that only becomes possible when you have accumulated resources beyond what any normal person can imagine acquiring. The show is vague about the specifics, appropriately vague, because the specifics would require committing to a specific history that the floating timeline would eventually contradict. But the general shape is consistent. The Burns family built power through infrastructure. They controlled the things that communities needed to function: water, fuel, transportation, and eventually, in the 20th century, electricity. The nuclear power plant is not the beginning of the Burns empire. It is the current form of an empire whose essential character, the ownership of the things everyone needs, and the leverage that ownership provides, has never changed. What Charles Montgomery Burns inherited was not just money. He inherited a model, a way of organizing the relationship between wealth and community that has been refined across generations to its most efficient possible form. The model is simple. Own the infrastructure, keep the infrastructure running, ensure that no alternative to the infrastructure exists, and the community will fund your existence indefinitely because the alternative to funding you is darkness. Burns did not invent this model. He has been perfecting it. And the nuclear plant is its final form, the most total expression of the model that it has ever achieved. Not because nuclear power is uniquely coercive, but because the byproduct of nuclear power, the contamination that the plant releases into the water and the air and the soil, creates a secondary form of control that the earlier iterations of the Burns model never had. The contamination does not just make the community dependent on Burns's plant for electricity. The contamination makes the community incapable of fully understanding its own dependency. Previous generations of the Burns model required active, ongoing management of the community's awareness. You had to keep buying politicians and intimidating journalists and suppressing inconvenient research and maintaining the social and economic conditions that kept people too busy or too afraid to look closely at who owned what and why. The radiation does all of that passively, without management, without active effort. The contamination spreads through the water supply and does its work on the prefrontal cortex and the critical faculties, and the result is a community that cannot connect the dots, that forgets the dome and the fish and the skeletons in the basement, that watches the billionaire glow in the dark and thinks of space aliens rather than radiation. Burns has not just solved the problem of keeping his community compliant. He has solved it permanently. He has made it self-maintaining. He has, in the most literal possible sense, poisoned his way to security. The question of what Burns actually feels about Springfield and its residents is one that the show raises without resolving, and the complexity of what the show puts on screen around this question suggests that the writers found it genuinely difficult. The easy reading is contempt. Burns has contempt for most of the people around him, expressed in the specific way that a person who has lived with absolute power for a very long time develops contempt, not as an emotional reaction to specific individuals, but as a baseline orientation toward human beings in general. Most people, to Burns, are variables in an equation, inputs and outputs with no inherent moral weight. But the show has, across its run, shown us moments that complicate this. Burns in the Springfield Files, stumbling out of his treatment facility in a daze, glowing in the dark, genuinely joyful in a way that has nothing to do with power or strategy or the management of his empire. Burns in his moments of actual vulnerability, which the show allows more than you might expect. Moments where the ancient body and the ancient mind are briefly visible as the frail and exhausted things they are, sustained only by the schedule that Smithers keeps. Burns has a relationship with Homer that is, under all the dynamic of power and ignorance, one of the show's most quietly complex. He cannot remember Homer's name. This is a running gag. But the running gag has a quality underneath it that is not quite comedy. Burns encounters Homer, fails to identify him, is reminded who he is, continues to fail to retain the information. And this failure happens with a frequency and a consistency that begins to suggest something other than simple forgetfulness in a man who is clearly not forgetful in general. Burns is sharp. Burns remembers things from before the First World War. Burns manages the complexities of a billion-dollar empire with a mind that the contamination has, apparently, left intact in ways it has not left Homer's intact. He cannot remember the name of the man who works directly for him, who he sees regularly, who has been his employee for decades. Unless he can. Unless the forgetting is not incapacity but choice. Because remembering Homer's name would require Burns to acknowledge Homer as a person rather than a variable. Would require acknowledging the deal he struck with Homer's grandfather. Would require acknowledging the role he played in the disappearance of Homer's mother. Would require, in other words, the full accounting of what Burns has done to the Simpson family across 3 generations. and that accounting is one that Burns has decided, at some level, not to open. The forgetting is not cruelty. The forgetting is self-protection. The oldest and most powerful man in Springfield cannot afford to see the most ordinary one clearly, because if he did, he would have to see what he made of him. Expanded. Maggie's Long Game. The full case. Here is the full catalog of what Maggie has demonstrated across 36 years, laid out not as an argument but as evidence. She saved the family car from rolling off a cliff by taking the wheel and steering at an age when most children have not yet fully developed the grip strength to hold a steering wheel. She did this calmly, without panic, as if steering were something she had been prepared for. She organized a group of infants against the authoritarian management of their daycare facility. She did this through nonverbal communication, through gesture and example, which required not just a plan, but the ability to convey a plan to other people without language. This is a communication task that many adults struggle with. She protected a caterpillar through a sequence of obstacles that required her to read the environment, identify threats, develop strategies, execute those strategies under time pressure, and adapt when initial approaches failed. She succeeded completely. The butterfly was released. She was tested for intelligence by a character whose professional role was the assessment of cognitive function, and the test could not produce a reliable result because the result exceeded what the test was designed to measure. The show treats this as a quick joke. The implication is not quick. The implication is that the measurement of Maggie's intelligence requires a scale that does not yet exist. She was identified as the person who shot Charles Montgomery Burns, and whether she actually pulled the trigger or was in the room when it was pulled, or was simply the most convenient suspect, she navigated the subsequent investigation with a composure that a 1-year-old has no business having. She said nothing. She revealed nothing. She maintained precisely the demeanor that would confirm neither guilt nor innocence while the investigation concluded itself around her. And she checked the room before performing the trigger gesture. She looked around. She confirmed her solitude. And then, and only then, she did the thing she was going to do. That sequence of 3 actions, the environment scan, the solitude confirmation, the private enactment, requires a theory of mind. The ability to understand that other people's awareness of your actions is a variable that can be managed, that what others see and what you do when they are not seeing you are different categories of experience. This is a cognitive milestone that developmental psychology tracks carefully because it is one of the clearest indicators of a certain kind of social intelligence. It typically emerges between 18 months and 3 years of development. Maggie demonstrates it as a younger infant. She has been demonstrating it since 1989 without anyone in Springfield, without most of the audience watching, noticing what the demonstration means. The strategic function of the pacifier deserves its own attention. The pacifier is the most visible element of Maggie's performed infancy. It is always there, in every shot, in every scene. The constant movement of the pacifier, the rhythm of it, the way it anchors every image of Maggie as the image of a baby rather than an intelligence, is the centerpiece of the disguise. But watch the pacifier carefully in the episodes where Maggie is doing something remarkable. It moves differently. Not dramatically differently. Not in a way that breaks the visual logic of the shot. But the rhythm changes when Maggie is processing something, when she is making a decision, when the mind behind the baby face is running through its calculations. The pacifier's movement is faster, more focused in those moments. And then it returns to its slow, ambient pulse when the decision has been made and the strategic calculation has concluded. The pacifier is a tell, the most subtle, most consistent tell in the show's history. Sitting right there in the center of every Maggie scene. Impossible to notice unless you know what you are looking for. Which is exactly the situation Maggie has engineered. The question of what Maggie will eventually do when the long game she has been playing since 1989 finally arrives at whatever conclusion she has been working toward is the last truly open question in the show's canon. Every other mystery has at least an official answer, even if that answer is contested. The Who Shot Burns mystery has Maggie. The Why Does No One Age mystery has the floating timeline. The Why Does Burns Glow mystery has the weekly treatments. Every question has been at least nominally addressed. Maggie's endgame has never been addressed. not even nominally. The show has never suggested in any episode that Maggie has a plan. It has shown us evidence of planning, the carefulness, the patience, the long accumulation of information and experience in a being who presents as helpless. But it has never told us what the plan is aimed at, and this is the most unsettling narrative choice in the entire history of the show. Because a planning mind without a stated goal is a planning mind with a private goal, something it is keeping to itself, something it has decided the people around it should not know about until the appropriate moment. Maggie is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She has been watching Springfield for 36 years. She has watched Burns manage his immortality and maintain his contamination. She has watched Homer fail to see the architecture of his own suffering. She has watched the town vote to exile the truth again and again. She has watched Lisa fight and be ignored and fight again. She has watched the cooling towers breathe, and she has said nothing, and she has waited. And whatever comes next, whatever the next phase of the long game is, it has been in preparation for a very long time. Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will. That is the whole point. Expanded. The prediction machine, cultural feedback. There is a concept in systems theory called a feedback loop. This is a situation in which the output of a system becomes an input to the same system, creating a circular causal relationship in which the system begins to influence itself. Feedback loops can be stabilizing, where the output counteracts the input and keeps the system in a steady state, or they can be destabilizing, where the output amplifies the input and the system moves further and further from its original condition. The Simpsons' relationship with American culture is a feedback loop of the second kind. Here's how it works. The show observes American culture and satirizes what it observes, translating the observed patterns into jokes and stories and characters. The audience receives the satire and incorporates it into their own understanding of American culture, creating new reference points and frameworks that did not exist before the satire. The culture that these new frameworks are applied to is thereby changed by the application, and the changed culture generates new phenomena that the show then observes and satirizes, and the cycle continues. This is not a theory. This is a description of what demonstrably happens when any piece of widely distributed media engages with the culture it is distributed within for a long enough time. But The Simpsons' version of this feedback loop has some specific qualities that make it different from the standard case. The first is scale. The show has reached an audience large enough and continuous enough across a period long enough to make the feedback loop unusually powerful. When nearly every American who has watched television for the last 36 years has watched The Simpsons to at least some degree, the show's satire of American culture is not just reaching a subset of that culture. It is reaching the culture as a whole and becoming part of the cognitive furniture that the culture uses to understand itself. The second is that the show's satire is more accurate than most. This sounds simple, but its implications are significant. A satire that is inaccurate, that misidentifies the patterns it claims to be observing, generates a feedback loop in which false beliefs are amplified and the culture moves away from accurate self-understanding. A satire that is accurate, that correctly identifies the patterns it observes and follows them to their logical conclusions, generates a feedback loop in which the culture becomes increasingly aware of those patterns. The Springfield nuclear plant is a real kind of thing. The Burns character represents a real kind of power. Homer's impairment represents a real kind of condition. The town's collective amnesia represents a real kind of social mechanism. The satire is accurate, and the satire has been running for 36 years. What this means is that the version of America that The Simpsons predicted was not a future America. It was the America that was already there when the show started, made visible by the satire, made increasingly recognizable to the audience through decades of repeated observation. The predictions are not prophecies. They are the results of a feedback loop making previously invisible patterns visible. The show showed America what America was. America looked at the show and recognized itself. And recognizing itself, America became more like the recognition. And the show observed the becoming and reflected it back. and the loop kept running, and Springfield kept breathing. Expanded. Springfield everywhere. The final geography. I want to end this section with something that is less a theory and more an observation about what it means to live in a real Springfield. Not the fictional one. Not the cartoon town with the power plant and the tire fire and the yellow families. A real one. The kind of place that Groening was thinking about when he named the town after the Springfield nearest to his childhood. The kind of place that the show was drawing on when it populated its streets and its institutions and its civic life. Real Springfields are everywhere. There is one near where you live in some form. It may not have a nuclear power plant. It probably does not have a three-eyed fish or a billionaire who glows in the dark. But it has something. Every community has something at its center that nobody talks about directly, something that shapes the life of the place in ways that go unacknowledged. Something whose acknowledged and unacknowledged effects define who the community is more than any of the things it is officially proud of. The tire fire burning on the hill in the background. The industry on the edge of town whose contribution to the economy makes the conversation about what it also contributes very difficult to have. The water that tastes a certain way and has tasted that way for a long time and that nobody has tested recently because the testing is expensive and the results might be inconvenient. The billionaire whose influence pervades the civic life of the community in ways that everybody knows about and nobody names, because naming it would require doing something about it, and doing something about it would require a kind of sustained collective action that the community has never quite managed to organize. The collective amnesia, the episodic reset, the way a serious scandal in the spring becomes a forgotten detail by the fall, the way an environmental story dies when the news cycle moves on, and the affected community has to keep living in the affected environment without the ongoing attention of the people who were briefly paying attention. These are real things. They are Springfield. And The Simpsons has been documenting them with remarkable fidelity and remarkable patience for 36 years. Not as accusation, not as manifesto, as comedy. As the kind of story that can be told in the form of a yellow family in a cartoon house because the yellow family in the cartoon house makes the story safe enough to take in. The jokes are the delivery system for the truth. The laughter is what allows the truth to travel all the way from the screen to the place inside you where it needs to land. Springfield is funny, and Springfield is real. And the fact that it is both simultaneously is not a contradiction. It is the whole point. This is a story about a town that time forgot, and about the time we spent inside it, and about what we found when we looked closely enough. Good night, Springfield. We will be back next Sunday. The supporting cast. Springfield's forgotten witnesses. We have spent the bulk of our time with the Simpson family and with Burns, which is appropriate because they are the center of everything. But Springfield's paradoxes are not confined to the main capital. They radiate outward from the center into every corner of the town, into the lives of the secondary characters and the background presences, and the recurring faces whose own impossibilities the show layers in so quietly that they tend to pass without comment. Let us spend some time with them, not quickly. Slowly, the way you would move through a house you have known for a long time, not in a hurry, not looking for anything specific, just letting the familiarity of each room be what it is. Chief Clancy Wiggum. Springfield's head of police is, by any metric that can be applied to law enforcement, a catastrophic failure of the function his office is supposed to perform. He is corrupt without apparent ideology, taking bribes and favors not because he has a particular agenda to advance, but because the taking of bribes and favors has become his default professional orientation, as natural and unreflective as the way he eats donuts. He is professionally incompetent in ways that go beyond the satirical representation of police ineffectiveness and into something that requires a different category of explanation. He has failed to prevent crimes that were happening in front of him. He has solved cases through processes that bear no relationship to actual detective work. He has arrested the wrong people with cheerful consistency and released the right people through some mixture of bribery, confusion, and the kind of institutional inertia that keeps systems running long after the systems have stopped functioning. Within the logic of the radiation theory, Wiggum represents a particular kind of cognitive impairment, the impairment that makes authority function without effectiveness, that produces a person who performs the behaviors of a role without the cognitive capacity to fulfill the role's actual purpose. He has the badge and the gun and the squad car and the authority. He does not have the analytical capacity to use any of these tools in service of what they are officially for. And the town tolerates this because the town needs law enforcement to exist, not to function. The existence of law enforcement, the performance of it, the presence of the badge and the car and the uniform is sufficient to maintain the social fiction that order is being maintained. Actual enforcement of actual law would disrupt the equilibrium. It would require investigating the plant. It would require investigating burns. It would require opening doors that the town has officially voted to keep closed. Wiggum cannot connect the dots because Wiggum was never meant to connect the dots. He is not incompetent by accident. He is the right person for the job as the job actually exists. Ned Flanders lives in the house next door to the Simpsons, and the relationship between the two families, across 36 seasons of shared fence and shared catastrophe and shared Springfield air, is one of the show's most consistently underexamined dynamics. Ned is everything Homer is not. Patient where Homer is impulsive. Organized where Homer is chaotic. Faithful where Homer is skeptical. Generous where Homer is self-interested. By any conventional measure of character, Ned is the better man. By the show's own internal accounting, the universe consistently and comprehensively rewards Homer and punishes Ned. Homer's wife is still with him. His children are healthy. His job, inexplicably, is secure. His house, despite the frequency with which it is damaged or destroyed, is restored. His life, despite the frequency with which it should have ended badly, continues. Ned's wife is dead, killed in a freak accident at a public event, an accident that was directly enabled by Homer's selfishness. Ned's house has been destroyed. His business has faced extinction. His faith has been tested beyond what most people's faith would survive. And Ned forgives. Every time. Not because the forgiveness comes naturally or easily, not because he has processed the things that have been done to him and arrived at a genuine peace. He forgives because his brain was rewired in childhood to produce forgiveness as an automatic response, bypassing the normal emotional processing that would allow him to feel the full weight of what he has experienced and decide how to respond to it. The episode that reveals this, the episode in which Ned's psychological breakdown leads to his hospitalization, and the revelation that his relentless niceness is a manufactured product rather than a genuine character trait, is not the show being dark for its own sake. It is the show making visible a mechanism that has been operating throughout Ned's entire history on screen. The niceness is a cage built by a well-meaning psychiatrist decades ago, maintained by Ned's own ongoing compliance with the conditioning, reinforced by a theology that provides a cosmological framework for interpreting every misfortune as part of a divine plan rather than as an expression of an unjust world. Ned needs the theology to hold. If the theology fails, if the belief that there is a plan and the plan is good and the suffering serves a purpose collapses, then what remains is the original child, the feral, violent, uncontrolled child that the conditioning was designed to contain. And that child, given the decades of accumulated grievance that Ned has been absorbing without processing, is something the show wisely declines to depict for more than a moment. God talks to Homer in the show's continuity. This is established fact, documented across multiple episodes. Homer has had direct, face-to-face conversational contact with God twice that the show depicts explicitly. And there may be others. God has never spoken to Ned. The man who has dedicated his life to faith, who has organized every aspect of his existence around his relationship with a God he believes in completely, who has absorbed catastrophe after catastrophe by invoking that belief as the framework that gives the catastrophe meaning, has never received a word. The drunk who falls asleep in church gets divine conversation. The devoted man who is always listening gets silence. This is not an accident. This is the show's theology, stated plainly. The universe of Springfield does not reward virtue. It does not respond to faith. It does not organize itself according to the merits of the people living within it. It organizes itself according to the mechanics of power, and the mechanics of power have nothing to do with whether Ned Flanders deserves better than what he has received. Ned deserves better. He has always deserved better. And the show has always known this and has always given him the same thing anyway. Because that is Springfield. That is the loop, and everyone in it gets exactly what the loop requires of them, regardless of what they deserve. Apu Nahasapima Petilon has run the Quick E-Mart on the corner of Springfield for the entirety of the show's run. He is, within the economics of Springfield, a small business owner who represents the particular experience of an immigrant, building something in a town that regards his presence with the casual condescension of a place that has never had to examine its own assumptions about who belongs and who does not. The Quickie Mart is open at all hours. It is always the same. Apu is always there, behind the counter, the same expression of beleaguered dignity that the character has maintained through decades of being treated as a background fixture rather than a person with a history and an inner life and stakes in the life of the community around him. Within the radiation theory, Apu represents something specific. He is not native to Springfield, or at least was not always native to it. He came from elsewhere, from a different place and a different background, and he built his life in Springfield rather than inheriting it. This makes him a useful case study for the contamination question, because he demonstrates the point where the environmental effects of a place begin to manifest in someone who did not grow up inside them. Apu's presence in Springfield is long enough that whatever the town has been doing to its residents, it has been doing to him. He drinks the water, he breathes the air, he lives under the shadow of the cooling towers. He has raised children in Springfield. His family has the same four fingers as every other Springfield family. He is not native to the contamination zone. He has become part of it. That is one of the most unsettling implications of the radiation theory. The implication that the contamination is not a fixed quality of the Springfield-born, but a progressive acquisition available to anyone who spends enough time inside the zone. The town does not just mark you if you were born there. The town marks you if you stay long enough. And Apu has stayed. Hans Moleman, as we touched on earlier, is a special case. He deserves more than the brief treatment we gave him in the main body of this exploration. The catalog of Hans Moleman's deaths is one of the most remarkable hidden narratives in the history of American television. Not remarkable for its content, which is uniformly brief and usually physical, a car, a falling object, an animal encounter, a combination of these. Remarkable for its accumulation. Remarkable for the way the show has treated the repeated death of a recurring character as a running gag so ambient, so thoroughly absorbed into the background noise of Springfield, that the audience has largely stopped noticing it. Hans Moleman dies. And then Hans Moleman is in the next episode, completely unaddressed, as if he did not die 2 weeks ago in a scene that the show depicted on screen. The show does not explain this. The show does not feel obligated to explain it. Because in Springfield, certain things have simply stopped requiring explanation. The categories of the strange that were once anomalies have been absorbed into the ordinary, and the line between what requires explanation and what is just how things are has been redrawn around a territory that includes, apparently, the death and resurrection of Hans Moleman. But Moleman's specific case adds one more detail that the casual viewer tends to miss. He has stated his age as 31 years old. 31. He appears to be in his 80s at minimum, possibly older. The gap between his stated age and his visible age is not the kind of gap that results from hard living or stress, or the cumulative wear of a difficult existence, though Springfield offers plenty of all three. It is the kind of gap that results from something accelerating the aging process far beyond its normal rate, and accelerating it specifically in one person, while apparently leaving most of the town at the correct biological age for their stated years. If Moleman is 31 but looks 80, something has aged him at approximately 2.5 times the normal rate. If the contamination theory is correct, the contamination does not produce uniform effects. It produces different outcomes in different people depending on their specific biological response to long-term radiation exposure. In most residents, the primary effect appears to be cognitive, the kind of impairment that the show depicts as comedy and the theory reads as consequence. But in Hans Moleman, the primary effect appears to be somatic, physical, expressed in the body rather than the mind. And the body's expression is rapid aging and the strange biological resilience that comes with it, the quality that allows him to die and come back, to absorb fatal trauma and reset, to be crushed and incinerated and consumed and return to the next episode intact. The radiation made Homer cognitively damaged and physically nearly indestructible. The radiation made Maggie cognitively extraordinary. The radiation made Hans Moleman physically ancient at 31 and apparently unable to die. Same source. Radically different expressions. The contamination zone does not produce one outcome. It produces a spectrum, and Hans Moleman is the far end of a spectrum whose full range the show has been depicting, without quite saying so, for 36 years. Sideshow Bob, née Robert Underdunk Terwilliger, Jr., is the show's most formally compelling recurring antagonist, and he is interesting in this context not because of his relationship to the show's paradoxes, but because of his relationship to the loop. Sideshow Bob has tried to kill Bart Simpson approximately a dozen times. He has failed every single time. He has failed in ways that are increasingly elaborate, increasingly sophisticated, increasingly reflective of a man who has spent significant time in prison, between attempts thinking about what went wrong and how to do better. Each attempt is more carefully planned than the last. Each attempt incorporates lessons learned from the previous failure. He is getting better at this, and it does not matter. He cannot succeed, not because he is incompetent. He is clearly not incompetent. His attempts are often brilliant in conception, but because the loop does not permit it. The loop requires Bart Simpson alive at the age of 10 at the beginning of every episode, and Bart Simpson dead would end the loop, and the loop does not end. Sideshow Bob is not failing because of Bart's skill or luck or intelligence. Sideshow Bob is failing because the loop cannot accommodate his success. And this is the most sophisticated joke the show tells about itself. The villain who cannot win because winning would end the show is a villain the show cannot let go of, because he is the only character who is explicitly, directly, self-consciously trying to break the loop. He is trying to make something permanent happen. In Springfield, where nothing permanent can happen, and he fails. Every time. With perfect consistency. Not because the writing is protecting Bart. Because the loop is protecting itself. Because the loop always protects itself. Because that is what loops do. Marge Simpson is the character the show has most consistently underserved and most consistently relied upon. And the tension between those two facts is one of the most interesting and least examined dynamics in the show's history. Marge holds everything together. This is not a figure of speech. Within the internal logic of the show's world, Marge is the structural element that keeps the family functional. Without her patience, the chaos that Homer generates would consume the household. Without her constancy, the kids' education and health and emotional development would fall to no one. Without her willingness to absorb the weight of the family's dysfunction and redistribute it in forms that the family can carry, the whole structure would collapse. The show knows this. The show has made this explicit in episodes that imagine what Springfield would look like without Marge's stabilizing presence. And the answer is uniformly bleak. And yet Marge is rarely the center. She is the base, not the apex. Her needs and her desires and her inner life are episodic material, something the show returns to when it needs a Marge episode, rather than the structural constant that Homer's chaos is. Homer's chaos drives plots. Marge's stability enables plots. And the show has consistently found the driving force more interesting than the enabling force. Within the radiation theory, Marge occupies a specific position. She too has been contaminated. She too shows the physical markers of long-term exposure. She too has the four fingers and the yellowing and the eyes that are not quite the right shape. She too has been drinking the water and breathing the air and living in the shadow of the cooling towers. But Marge's cognitive profile is different from Homer's. Where Homer's impairment is most visible in his inability to think long-term, to plan, to connect consequences to actions in a sustained way, Marge's is most visible in a different dimension. Marge keeps choosing to stay, in a situation that, if examined with full cognitive clarity, should produce a different conclusion about whether to remain in it. Marge has the information. She has the evidence. She sees the dysfunction clearly enough to manage it, which means she sees it, which means she knows. And she stays. Not because she is incapable of seeing, because she has decided to stay. And the theory has to grapple with this. The radiation impairs the connection of dots in a population that has been exposed. But Marge connects enough dots to run the household, to compensate for Homer's deficiencies, to anticipate problems, and address them before they reach the scale of catastrophe. The radiation has not taken that from her. What it may have taken, what the long-term exposure may have selectively removed, is the specific calculation that produces the conclusion this situation should change. Not the perception of the problem, the will to act on the perception in the most drastic available way. Marge sees the problem, and she chooses every episode to work within the problem rather than solve it at the root. And that choice, repeated across 36 years, across every reset and every disaster and every moment when the case for leaving would be stronger than the case for staying, is either the most profound expression of love in the show's canon or the most comprehensive symptom of a mind that has been subtly, selectively impaired in exactly the faculty that would permit a different outcome. The show never tells you which it is, because the show has always known that the honest answer is that it is both. The couch. The show's deepest metaphor. Every episode of The Simpsons ends with the family on the couch. This is not quite true in every episode, but it is true often enough and consistently enough that the couch gag, the brief, often absurdist sequence in the opening credits where the family races to the couch, has become one of the show's most recognized elements. 3,000 words could be written about the couch gag alone. The variety of it, the creativity with which the show has approached those few seconds of animation across 36 years is genuinely remarkable. The couch gag has been everything from a single static shot to an elaborate parody of other films and shows, to an extended piece of experimental animation that pushes the format far beyond what its 3 seconds of screen time would seem to permit. But the couch itself, the object, what the couch means. The Simpsons couch is the most returned-to single object in the history of American television. More people have seen the Simpson family arrive at that couch than have seen any other domestic setting in any other show. The couch is the endpoint of every episode's opening sequence. It is where the family assembles, where the credits conclude, where the show officially begins. It is the center of the center, the domestic heart of an already domestic show. And the family is always there. Whatever chaos the episode contains, whatever plot drags them away from Evergreen Terrace and into the larger world of Springfield and beyond, by the end of the opening sequence, they are on the couch, together, ready to begin. The coma theory reads this in a specific way. If the show is Homer's dream, then the couch is the place the dream keeps returning to, because the couch is the last place Homer consciously was. Before the vending machine, before the hospital. In the moment before everything stopped, Homer was at home. With his family. The family gathered around the television, the specific domestic tableau that the opening sequence recreates in miniature every single episode. The dream does not return to the couch because the couch is comfortable. The dream returns to the couch because the couch is the last real thing. The point of contact between the world that was and the world that is being dreamed. The moment just before the dark, preserved in the amber of the unconscious mind, returned to again and again, because that moment is the anchor of everything that follows. Every time the Simpson family races to the couch in the opening credits, Homer is going home. Not the home on Evergreen Terrace, the home inside the moment before he lost consciousness. The home that the dream has been protecting for 36 years. There is a quality to the show, perceptible in the best episodes, that I have been circling around all night without quite saying directly. The show is made with love. Not just the love that the characters have for each other, which is real within the show's logic and which the show honors without sentimentality. The love of the people who made it. The thousands of writers and animators and voice actors and directors and producers and artists and technicians who have spent 36 years working on this thing, who have brought their intelligence and their craft and their own relationships with family and community and the particular American experience of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, all of that has poured into the show and can be felt in it. The paradoxes are not bugs. They are what happens when that much attention is paid to a single fictional place for that long. The theories are not wrong, even the ones that are factually incorrect within the show's own canon. They are right in the way that close reading is right, in the way that sustained attention to a text produces meanings that the text's makers may not have intended, but that the text genuinely contains because all texts genuinely contain more than their makers intended. Springfield is more than the show. The show is more than Springfield. And after 36 years of Sunday nights, of couch gags and cooling towers and three-eyed fish and yellow families, and the long, patient breathing of the steam, what you are left with is not a collection of paradoxes or a catalog of theories. You are left with a place. A strange, impossible, genuinely beloved place, where time stopped and nobody noticed, and the tire fire keeps burning on the hill, and the family is always on the couch, and the oldest man in America keeps his weekly appointments, and the baby has been watching everything for longer than seems possible. And somewhere in a hospital in a town that cannot be found on any map, a man is dreaming of his family. And the dream is still going. Let it be quiet now. Let the cooling towers be in the distance, breathing their slow breath in the dark. Let the Simpsons be on the couch, all of them together, the television on, the episode beginning, the couch gag playing, the show returning to the same place it has always returned to. Let the tire fire burn. Let the river carry its three-eyed passengers downstream. Let Maggie watch from behind the pacifier. Let Homer sleep. Let the loop run. Let Springfield be still, the way it has always been still, the way it will always be still, the way you are still right now in the dark, in whatever city or town or room or quiet place you have found for yourself tonight. Springfield is there in the dark behind your eyes. It has always been there. It always will be. This script was written to accompany the slow drift towards sleep. If you found something here that kept you company in the dark, please consider subscribing for more. There are more impossible towns to visit, more loops to trace, more quiet mysteries to sit with in the hours when the world has gone soft. Drop your time and location in the comments. Let the people watching from 1,000 different places know you were here. Good night. The deepest paradox. Why we keep watching. We have arrived at the question underneath all the other questions. Not what is Springfield, not why does time stop there, not who shot Mr. Burns or what Burns is taking to stay alive, or what Maggie is planning or what Homer is dreaming. Those are the surface paradoxes. They are the ones that fan theories engage with, that Reddit threads unravel, that video essays spend hours tracing through the canonical evidence. The question underneath all of them is simpler and more personal and harder to answer honestly. Why do we keep watching? Not in the generic sense of why does any television show retain an audience? The specific sense. Why does this one specifically, with all of its accumulated contradictions, and its deflated continuity, and its floating timeline, and its long retreat from the grounded emotional truth of its early seasons? Why does this one keep drawing people back? Why, when you tell someone you have been watching The Simpsons lately, do they nod with a particular kind of recognition, as if you have mentioned returning to a place they also know? Why does the mention of the show, of Springfield, of any of the characters, carry that specific warm resonance that only comes from things that have been present for a very long time in the cultural and personal background of your life? Why does Springfield feel like home to people who have never lived anywhere near it? The answer, I think, is that Springfield solves a problem that most people encounter and never fully resolve. The problem of continuity. Human life is discontinuous. The person you are at 10 is not the person you are at 20, and the person at 20 is not the person at 30, and so on. And the thread connecting all these different selves is sometimes thin enough that the continuity feels like a story you are telling rather than a reality you are living. The things that mattered at 10 do not matter at 30. The things that were simple have become complicated. The places you remember have changed. The people you knew have become different people or have gone away. The world does not hold still. And there is a grief in that, quiet and persistent and rarely named. The grief of a world that keeps becoming something other than what you knew it as. The grief of time passing in the specific direction it passes, which is forward away from everything you have already had. Springfield does not move in that direction. Springfield stays. The house on Evergreen Terrace is the same house it was in 1989. The couch is the same couch. The family is the same family. Whatever you knew about them when you first encountered them, they are still exactly that. The show is a machine for the preservation of a specific domestic moment, and it has been running that machine for 36 years. Every time you return to it, it is there. Every time. Without variation. Without the modifications that time makes to everything else you have ever loved and returned to. The Simpsons does not become a different show between visits. It does not age or drift or accumulate the kind of subtle wrongness that return to places often accumulate when real time has intervened between visits. It is simply there. The way a childhood home is there in memory. Always the same, always exactly as you left it, preserved against the entropy that claims everything real. Except unlike a childhood home in memory, Springfield is accessible. You can actually go there every Sunday or whenever the mood strikes, for the high, and it will be exactly as you remember it. There is a specific quality to the show's later seasons that the harshest critics describe as laziness or decay, a retreat from the standards of the early seasons into something more mechanical and less inspired. I do not fully agree with this criticism, though I understand it. What the later seasons represent in my reading is not a decline but a different kind of work. The early seasons were building something, they were establishing the world, investing in the characters, creating the emotional architecture that the show would depend on for everything that followed. That work is urgent and visible and produces the specific excitement of watching something that is in the process of becoming what it will be. The later seasons are maintaining something. They are the seasons of a show that has already become what it will be and is now tasked with being that thing continuously, with returning to the same place every week and making the return feel like a discovery rather than a repetition. This is harder work than it looks. And the later seasons do it imperfectly, in the way that anything sustained over decades is done imperfectly, with inconsistencies and lapses and stretches of pure procedural production that serve the function of being an episode without achieving much beyond that. But they also, in the best moments, do it beautifully. There are episodes in the 20th and 25th and 30th seasons that have the quality of the best early work, not because they recreate the early seasons, but because they have found, within the later show's different toolkit, the same emotional honesty that made the early seasons matter. The tools are different, the achievement is the same. This is not a defense of all of it. The later seasons have produced bad episodes. Every season has. But the later seasons have also produced moments of genuine creative intelligence, jokes that only work because of 30 years of accumulated context, emotional resonances that only land because you have known these characters long enough for their specific shapes of feeling to be familiar. The show has gotten stranger and in some ways lesser as it has aged, but it has also gotten deeper. The way all old things get deeper. The way a place you have known for a long time becomes, through accumulated experience of it, something richer and stranger and more layered than it was when you first arrived. The paradox of the later seasons is that they need to be bad sometimes for the good moments to work. The reset button, the episodic format that erases consequences and returns the characters to their starting positions at the end of every episode, is usually discussed as a limitation, as the thing that prevents the show from having the kind of sustained character development and narrative consequence that the prestige dramas of the same era were building their reputations on. But the reset is also what makes the show available in a specific way that serialized dramas are not. You can enter a serialized drama at any point and feel the weight of what you have missed. The continuity accumulates, and the new viewer must account for it. The show is a record of a process of change, and if you arrive after the change has begun, you are always catching up. The Simpsons does not require you to catch up. You can watch any episode from any season with no prior knowledge of the show, and the characters will be exactly what they have always been. The context you bring is optional. The history you carry is enriching, but not necessary. The show is available to you wherever you arrive. This accessibility is not a concession to the lowest common denominator. It is a feature that the show developed deliberately and has maintained deliberately for 36 years. The show wants to be available. The show wants to be there for people who have never watched it before and for people who have been watching for 30 years and for everyone in between. The reset makes this possible. The reset, which looks from one angle like a failure to allow growth, looks from another angle like the thing that keeps the door open. Anyone can walk through at any time, and Springfield will be there exactly as it is, ready to receive them. Let me tell you about the last time I thought about The Simpsons in a way that surprised me. It was late at night, later than this, probably. The kind of hour when the thoughts that stay quiet during the day come forward and sit with you, not insistently, just present in the way that things are present in the dark, when the business of being awake is finally over. I was thinking about Homer, not about the theories, not about the radiation or the coma or the architecture of Burns's control over his life. About Homer himself, about the specific quality of what it means to be Homer Simpson, to want so much, so simply, so continuously, and to have those wants met in such an imperfect way, so incompletely, with so many gaps and failures and moments where the love is real and the execution is disastrous, and the result is a relationship between a man and his family that is, by any objective standard, a mess. And to keep going anyway, to come home every episode, to sit on the couch, to wrap his arms around his family in the way that Homer wraps his arms around his family, awkward and too tight, and not quite the right shape for the hug he is attempting, and to mean it. Every time. To mean it completely and without reservation, whatever else he has gotten wrong. There is something in that, not a lesson, not a moral, just a quality of the love that persists in spite of everything it cannot do. In spite of the impairment and the contamination and the coma and the weight of the history that was made for Homer before he was old enough to understand what was being made. In spite of the fact that the man Homer could have been is somewhere behind the crayon and the radiation, visible only in the one episode where the crayon was removed and then deliberately put back. In spite of all of it, the love persists. And maybe that is the answer to the deepest paradox. Not what keeps Springfield frozen, what keeps us watching. The love persists. In Springfield, on Evergreen Terrace, in the house with the cooling towers on the horizon and the tire fire on the hill and the three-eyed fish in the river, through all the impossibilities. The love is there. And we watch because we need to see it be there. Because some part of us, the part that sat in front of the television in whatever year and whatever house we first encountered this family, needs to know that love of this quality, love this persistent and this imperfect and this completely real despite everything working against it is possible. Even in Springfield, especially in Springfield, in the most impossible town in the history of American fiction, on a couch in front of a television, in the loop that never ends, in the dream that never wakes, in the contamination zone that produced extraordinary and terrible and ordinary and extraordinary things in equal measure from the same source. The love is still there. It has always been there. Go to sleep now. The family's on the couch. Everything is fine. Afterward, the tire fire burns on. There is one thing about Springfield that nobody argues about. Not the theorists, and not the showrunners, and not the critics, and not the casual viewers who have been watching for 30 years without ever thinking too hard about why. One thing that everyone who has ever spent time in Springfield, fictional or analytical, agrees on without hesitation. The tire fire is still burning. It has been burning since before the show's timeline began, before the first episode aired, before Matt Groening sold the premise to Fox in the late 1980s. The tire fire is described in the show's history as something that has been a feature of the Springfield landscape for decades, a perpetual fixture on the hill above the town that generations of residents have lived with as a background condition of their environment. It generates no heat in the narrative sense. No episode has been written about the tire fire. No character has a meaningful relationship to it. It has never become a plot point or a crisis or a source of conflict or resolution. It is simply there, present, in the background of exterior shots, a column of dark smoke visible on the horizon, the most permanent thing in the most impermanent of towns. It is burning right now in whatever Springfield currently is, wherever Springfield currently sits in its shifting geography. The yellow families are in their houses, and the cooling towers are breathing, and the river has its three-eyed passengers, and the oldest man in America is keeping his weekly appointments, and the baby is watching from behind the pacifier, and the dreaming man is dreaming on. And the tire fire burns. Not metaphorically, not as a symbol, though it functions as one, as the symbol of the things that communities set on fire and leave burning, because addressing them would require acknowledging they were set there in the first place. Not primarily as a joke, though it is that too, the kind of joke that is funnier the longer it runs, miss, because the joke is about duration as much as anything else. The tire fire burns because the tire fire was always going to burn. Because Springfield, in all its impossible configurations and across all its impossible years, is the kind of place that has a tire fire burning on its hill. And because the tire fire burning on its hill is not a problem to be solved, but a quality of what Springfield is. This is Springfield. All of it. The theories and the paradoxes and the radiation and the coma and the mystery of the trigger and the immortality and the genius baby and the erased truth and the 3 generations of Simpsons broken by one man's grudge and the geography that refuses to be mapped and the time that refuses to move and the family that refuses to grow old and the love that refuses to stop being there despite everything working against it. All of it is Springfield. And the tire fire is burning, and it has always been burning, and it will be burning the next time you visit. Because that is Springfield. That is the loop. That is the whole impossible, beloved, damaged, radioactive, dreamed, yellow, four-fingered, couch-bound, timer fire-lit thing. Go to sleep. The loop will be here when you wake up. It always is. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. Drop your time and location in the comments. It matters to know where in the world people are falling asleep to this town. And if you want more of this kind of slow, deep storytelling, subscribe. There are more places to visit, more loops to trace, more fires burning on more hills, all of them waiting in the dark for someone patient enough to look. Until next time, the tire fire burns on.